Between the stern sentinels who stood guard over the land of fire with their unwavering stone eyes, the waterfall roared on as it always has. The valley of the end became quiet for Naruto. Except for the crackling chakra behind his head, the arm that was thrust through his right lung barely registered on his mind. Sasuke grinned in amusement and said, "HN." He forced a wider, more savage smile to form on his lips and said, "You were able to make me miss your heart by a little, but it doesn't matter, you're going to die anyway." After experiencing the Chidori's blinding pain, Naruto's senses began to wane and his whole body began to ache dully. Sasuke's arm guards were stained after Naruto choked out blood. His mind whirled, and he struggled mightily to maintain consciousness and focus. He still had a lot of questions, but more significantly, he had a mission to complete and a commitment to uphold. Sasuke. Uchiha Sasuke was unable to maintain his composure as he watched his friend gasp for air, his name on his lips. His resolve faltered somewhere hidden from himself. Grasping Sasuke's arm for support, Naruto rasped, "I don't understand, why you?" He carefully raised his gaze to the others, "But I don't regret it, coming after you." Sasuke's gaze expanded. His power high was gradually wearing off in the stillness, and the seriousness of the situation was gradually taking its place. Naruto was aware that he was dying. Naruto was in danger of dying. "You know, Sasuke, you're strong." Sasuke shuddered slightly. "There, others are strong." The blonde's voice had a hint of urgency, even though the words were slow to form. One gasped for air while the other held his granny, and that pervy sage could beat him. "We'll go back, he'll train you. Jiraiya will train you." Naruto gasped for air. He gritted his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut. Naruto's fingernails were digging into Sasuke's arm. The words, "Just don't go to Orochimaru, you have a dream to fulfill," made Naruto feel as though he were submerged. He was losing consciousness, but he resisted it with a strong will. He still had one more thing to say. "Don't you die, Sasuke." The eerily familiar words caused Sasuke's dark eyes to widen, and before he could place the memory, he instinctively jerked his hand away from Naruto. He would do anything to keep the boy away. Naruto landed on the water's surface in an orange heap, and went down unconscious enough to gasp for air. Naruto sank into the murky blue. His body's cavities were filled with water, and crimson trails danced upward. His soul begged to be freed from his beaten body, pulling and tugging, and Kyuubi hammered the gates deep within his body. Crap. Circlets rippled softly under Sasuke's feet. Long after he had witnessed Naruto's lifeless body being sucked up by the shadowy depths of the water, he stood motionless. The serene surface was abruptly broken by a tiny bubble. Sasuke was suddenly on his knees with his hand over his eyes as the ripples at his feet became violent. A tear rolled down his cheek as he gave them a firm squeeze. It was Ablaze. Startled by his own response, Sasuke opened his eyes wide and shuddered. He willed his ragged breath to stabilize and swallowed painfully as a lump rose menacingly in his throat. Inhale, exhale, inside out. Before he realized it, the water's surface was already bubbling and red Sharingan activated as Sasuke threw himself back and dropped into a fighting stance. The surface was broken by a hand. One more blonde hair struggling to pull the rest of himself up. Naruto clung to the water's surface by his elbows for a brief moment before it disappeared. Sasuke felt an odd chakra hover around Naruto's body. He gazed incredulously. Naruto let out a grunt and splashed his foot to the surface. Sasuke unstuck his tongue and snapped back to reality at the sound. You're not dead." Naruto gave him a fierce look. "Yeah, sorry to disappoint." He missed the sliver of relief in Sasuke's voice because he was so exhausted and agitated. Sasuke kept staring until Naruto's attention was drawn to something. "Sasuke, your eyes," Naruto began, temporarily forgetting his irritability. Breaking eye contact, Sasuke spun around and wiped his eyes with his arm. Sasuke deadpanned, "Leave it, it's nothing." "Fine, whatever, bastard." For a brief moment, they stood silently as Naruto squinted at Sasuke's back to determine whether the Uchiha had surrendered. "Hey, Sasuke." When it was Sasuke's turn to keep an eye on Naruto's back, he looked at the big, blackened rip beneath the shoulder of the garish orange jacket. "Let's go home." Despite his hesitation and the weight of the words in his chest, Sasuke finally moved to stand next to Naruto. "Yeah, okay." Slowly and silently, two figures moved toward Konoha through the forest. One crossed his arms and walked steadily. The other was on a sand cloud. Then Subaku no Gaara stopped. Lee said, "Huh? What is it?" In response, the sand nin looked toward the area where he sensed a presence. Lee, who was riding in Gaara's wake, swung his head randomly around until he noticed an odd orange hue in the distance. Lee yelled, "Naruto-kun," and wildly waved his hands above his head. The boy in green caused Gaara's barely noticeable pale eyebrows to twitch. Two figures emerged as footsteps smashed through the forest. Naruto exclaimed, bushy brows. Before he skidded to a halt, he was followed by Sasuke, who gritted his teeth and automatically assumed a fighting stance. Both stood on high alert, ignoring the protests of their aching bodies. Sasuke-kun. Lee exclaimed with a glowing smile and closed eyes, I'm so glad. The remark was ignored. Gaara. Without thinking, Naruto took a defensive step back. What are you doing here? Lee swiftly clarified, he came to help, Naruto-kun. In order to keep the altercation from turning into a brawl. Gaara was last seen by Naruto and Sasuke during the sound attack on Konoha. He saved me from Kimimaro after you left. Naruto squinted at Gaara's face after blinking in surprise. The redhead leaned back a little and scowled. It was awkwardly close to Naruto. This guy? Inquired Naruto. Naruto cantered forward to walk alongside the Sand Nin, and Gaara glanced at the boy for a moment before he began moving forward once more, dragging the cloud of sand Lee was sitting on with him like a balloon pulled by an unseen thread. Yes, Gaara-san mentioned something about owing Konoha a debt. Lee explained. Gaara looked at the blonde next to him, who was observing him with his head tilted inquisitively. Gaara paused and turned around, looking at the three-leaf shinobi that were with him. How strange. Gaara made eye contact with Naruto and said, especially you. He turned and walked on as if nothing had happened. My debt is to you three? All three of them replied in silent bewilderment, though Sasuke didn't display it on his face like the others did. After a moment of blinking foolishly, Naruto rushed forward and turned to walk backwards with his hands behind his head, grinning mischievously. You mean for beating the shit out of you? Anytime, provoked Naruto. Gaara said, don't get cocky, dumbass, in response. Sasuke watched warily from behind, caught in his own memory of the hatred and bloodlust Gaara had claimed they shared, of the unbelievable power he wielded. Lee watched Gaara nervously, unable to forget the murderous intent he felt when Gaara crushed half his body in the preliminaries. Even though the Sand Shinobi was now his ally, the wounds from the reconstructive surgery throbbed as if to confirm his memories. Of the devil, however, he sensed no conflict between Naruto and Gaara as they proceeded through the forest. The redhead remaining as unimpressed as ever, not irate, nor insane, and the blonde sporting that foolish grin. The memory of Naruto and a demonic Gaara fighting just before he had lost sight of them in the woods a few months prior made Sasuke frown. Gaara owed Naruto? What had happened between them? Sasuke had never given it much thought or cared to inquire, as he had been too preoccupied with the fact that Naruto had beaten Gaara to a draw and saved him and Sakura. Gaara wanted to say more, but he wasn't used to thinking about other people after he had been alone for so long. Even with his siblings, he wasn't used to thinking about them, so it was hard to make connections. However, Uchiha Sasuke literally broke down the barrier he had put up for himself after Yashimaru betrayed him, making Gaara feel his own blood for the first time. Then, seeing Lee's bond with his sensei brought back painful and perplexing memories, but made him face the emotion Yashimaru had defined, and tainted, as love. Slowly, he's beginning to reconcile with the abstraction. And that character from Uzumaki, for some reason, he claimed to understand and know Gaara's pain. Real pain. The kind of pain that makes one want to experience physical pain in order to get away from it. Oddly, Gaara believed him. They fought as enemies, but they later split up as, what was it? Companions? Kindred spirits? Gaara couldn't explain that either, but with that connection, with the newfound belief that he, too, could share a life with others, it had somehow given him more control over the demon inside of him. Maybe it no longer had unstable, angry emotions to react to. The redhead watched Naruto out of the corner of his eye and saw him white-knuckle his fists as if to channel pain into his palms, and Naruto's face struggled into a grimace as Shukaku pulled violently towards the blonde next to him, and Gaara stifled a gasp as his insides lurched. The feeling vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. Gaara's green eyes met Naruto's blue ones, but neither of them spoke. Down the hall, Hyuga Neji, his body still clammy from shock, writhed in pain as elite medic Nin desperately worked to repair his torn body. The Hokage herself was fighting to save an unconscious Akamichi Choji, who was battling the self-destructive side effects of his clan's special soldier pills. Nara Shikamaru, their team leader, sat nervously twiddling his thumbs. The red fluorescent light buzzed oppressively next to the sign in the quiet waiting room. A number of young shinobi were recently brought in wounded, two of whom were in critical condition. The red light blinked off after an eternity, and Shikamaru let himself feel a moment of relief before his nerves took over once more. Now, the only thing left unknown was that Choji and Neji were alive. Kakashi-san has arrived with Naruto and Sasuke-kun, a nurse informed the Hokage. She said, good, and let a tiny smile appear on her lips. Good, both of them? What are their conditions? Hokage-sama, Neither appears to have suffered any life-threatening physical injuries, though they have not yet been evaluated. Lee-kun, who is currently receiving treatment, came with them with some superficial wounds. Subaku no Gaara, who is unharmed, was with them only a slight chakra fatigue. Now isn't that similar to Gaara? Shikamaru looked up. He had totally forgotten she was there. He pushed up heavily with his palms and started to leave, but his sister Tamari was thinking more to herself than to the other people in the room. Seems as if your mission succeeded. When Shikamaru heard the Hokage's voice, he stopped. Despite everything, the Hokage's words ended his mission like magic, her final remark hitting its mark, and suddenly his defenses broke, a wave of dammed-up self-loathing, guilt, and relief rushing up his throat and into his eyes. Shikamaru never bothered with emotions because they were too troublesome. He kept his heart at bay and allowed his extraordinary mind to work. The mission will be carried out flawlessly the next time, he said, fighting back a sob. I can't believe Sasuke-kun's not allowing visitors. Geez. I meant unhurt when I asked that dumb Naruto to bring Sasuke back. Why does it always end up in fisticuffs with that boy? Sakura walked down the corridor holding a flower to her chest. Sakura was attempting to get rid of her noisy teammate and restore some semblance of normalcy, but she shook the thought from her mind because she knew that Sasuke had actually left and Naruto had been by her side. Sakura, who was beginning to feel a little silly for losing it and pleading with Naruto to bring Sasuke home, told herself, "You're such an idiot, Sakura. Sasuke's too clever to go do something stupid." No. Sasuke must have had a good reason. He was upset about something and it made him irrational, but he's back and everything is okay now, she said. She jolted out of her reverie when she heard footsteps coming down the hall. Did you also come to see Naruto, Shikamaru-kun? Sakura smiled in greeting, oblivious to the new Chunin's unusually solemn demeanor. Yeah. Don't bother, I've been waiting for him to wake up for more than an hour and he hasn't stirred, Shikamaru said, observing the single bloom in the kunoichi's hand and assuming it was originally intended for Sasuke. Was it really that bad? Sakura asked, her eyes widening. What took place? What did you do, Naruto? Before turning to face the ceiling, Shikamaru simply shrugged and walked away, pausing to look back at Sakura and observe her chokehold on the blossom. Even if no one asks or observes, that guy puts his heart into everything. This mission would have failed miserably if Naruto hadn't been there. Sakura watched in confusion as Shikamaru retreated, and it took her a few moments to remember her destination before she proceeded down the hall, stood at Naruto's door, and silently pushed it open. Under the thin blanket, Naruto lay in the hospital bed, and Sakura could just make out the bandages around his head, neck, and shoulders. However, what surprised her the most was the color that had been drained from his face. She had seen him sleep, sprawled out gracefully, his mouth hanging open, as animated as he is awake. The Naruto in front of her now had no expression on his face. If anything, he appeared exhausted, lifeless. Sakura shook her head, but her eyes fell back on her injured teammate. I suppose he went all out, didn't he? She thought, beginning to feel bad about trying to write him off just moments before. I just get in the way. I don't want to be the one who just cries anymore. Sakura's brow furrowed and her eyes gleamed with steely determination as she thought about her teammates. Next time, I'll help. I want to help the important people in my life. I won't be a burden anymore. She turned to find the Hokage. Naruto's bedside table had a flower on it. The Sannin gave Sasuke's sleeping form a critical look. They were not the possessive yellow eyes of a snake, but rather the eyes of a worried, if a little bewildered, toad hermit. Jiraiya had been asked specifically to assist Tsunade in sealing Orochimaru's curse on Sasuke Uchiha, and it was painfully clear now that Kakashi's previous sealing had failed, nor was Sasuke reliable enough to try another seal that needed the boy's cooperation. Jiraiya knew that it was the best Kakashi could manage given his skill level with seals, and that as a teacher. A self-regulated seal demonstrates trust and aids in the development of moral and mental strength. However, that time was gone, and they needed complete containment now to avoid further harm to the young shinobi's body. Oh no, children believe they're unbreakable. Jiraiya had just arrived that morning with news of the Akatsuki and had intended to take Naruto away to train so the brat could defend himself when he and the dangerous missing nin cult ultimately clashed, but he wasn't surprised that the reckless Naruto had ended up in the hospital again, and he certainly didn't expect Naruto to turn down the opportunity to train exclusively with the Sannin. His thoughts turned to another young shinobi whom he had previously resealed. What was this kid to Naruto? Rather, he begged Jiraiya to take in Sasuke as well. Jiraiya corrected himself, demanded. The blonde claimed he couldn't break his word, that he had to prove to Sasuke that he didn't have to give up his freedom to gain power, that he didn't have to be alone, and that he could be strong without breaking bonds. Naruto said many things, but the Sannin focused on one thing in particular. I can't watch Sasuke ruin himself, regardless of how much he hates me for it. He had been told by Kakashi that Naruto and Sasuke's relationship was similar to his and Orochimaru's, and perhaps that was part of the reason Jiraiya was drawn to the boy. Only Naruto did what he could not. He stopped his comrade from leaving Konoha, at least for the time being. Jiraiya understood what it was like to be in a one-sided friendship, to be continuously seeking recognition from someone who would never accept him as an equal, and he was aware of the helplessness and pain of seeing someone you cared for desert you and walk down a path full of darkness. It was against his better judgment to grant Naruto's wish. He needed to focus on Naruto's training if they ever hoped to have a chance against the Akatsuki. However, something in the boy's earnestness in both his voice and eyes, despite his obvious exhaustion, ignited feelings he had long ignored. He would help Sasuke. He would help Naruto succeed where his younger self had failed. He would not allow history to repeat itself. He looked grimly at the sleeping Sasuke. I can't break my word, pervy Sennin, that's my ninja way. Before Tsunade found him in the hospital room and asked him to help her with the sealing process, he had watched the blonde go into a deep sleep. A dark cavernous hall was lit by a single candelabrum, and at the end of it, a man crouched in front of a high chair, in which a figure, except for a glossy reptilian eye, was wrapped in bandages from head to toe, his hands gripping the armrest tightly, his anger directed at the inanimate object, which he detested when things didn't go his way. Orochimaru forced a laugh with a hint of madness, saying, "Kukakuku, so they all died, did they? I had also put a lot of money into them, what a letdown." He frowned, the lines of his facial bandages shifting. And Sasuke-kun is nowhere to be seen? No bodies were discovered, but there was evidence of a large-scale conflict at the border. Sasuke was presumably stopped from crossing the border. Normally Kabuto would have been boldly casual with Orochimaru, but given the importance of this mission to the volatile Sannin, he didn't want to risk provoking him into punishing the messenger. If Sasuke-kun made it across, our liaisons should have met him by now. Kabuto kept his eyes fixed on a spot on the stone floor, watching the shadows dance to the flicker of the flames. I suppose it was unavoidable in any case. I had to transfer into this form. Since the third had taken his arms, Kabuto had been acting like a child and throwing tantrums, so he looked up at his master in surprise, wondering if the new body would be enough to calm him down and ease the pain. The snake leaned on the armrest and rested his temple on his fist, saying, "Sasuke-kun's constitution will draw him to me again," adding, "and if not, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right, Kabuto?" Of course, Kabuto grinned as he stood up and pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Waiting in the shadows was Naruto from his treetop perch. He could see copies of himself and his team paused to converse in a clearing. The plan was straightforward. Use his cage Bunshin as decoys to lure the enemy out and trap them at Kakashi's signal. Naruto focused on mimicking the alertness of Sasuke's eyes, the nervous twist of Sakura's hands, and the bored tone of Kakashi's voice. The feint was only effective if the decoys were convincing. Details were crucial. Naruto had long since mastered appearance. Even Sasuke was impressed with the transformations during the second Chunin test in the Forest of Death, though he would never tell Naruto. But now he focused on mannerisms. He was always proud of his Bunshin henges. The proverbial prankster was a natural at imitation when he actually tried. The decoys, standing back to back with kunai in hand, were suddenly surrounded by 5 ninjas, and they engaged in a one-on-one battle with the enemy. The more decoys there were, the more difficult it was for Naruto to control. Multiple decoys were good for the shock factor and buying time, but extremely ineffective in a fight if his Bunshin weren't allowed to get hurt. Naruto screwed his eyes in concentration, and beads of moisture formed on his brow. If he had the luxury of breaking his concentration, he would have complained that no one understood how complicated his task was. Each decoy had to act independently, with its own fighting style, and they couldn't be hit or vanish with a puff of smoke and their plan would have failed. When will Kakashi give the signal? Damn it. That was all it took to get him to lose focus. Naruto jerked his back in shock when Bunshin Sakura vanished. Whoa! Despite his increased efforts to recover, Naruto's control over the jutsu quickly evaporated. Bamf! Bamf! 2 more puffs of smoke in a flash. The real Kakashi, Sasuke, and Sakura were flying into the clearing, but their opponents were already on guard. Kakashi faced 2 ninja. Sakura and Bunshin Naruto faced a pair, and Sasuke took on the final one. Hovering protectively close to Sakura, Naruto fell heavily, prepared to join his double, but when he looked up, it had already vanished. Oh no! The now unopposed ninja rushed at Sakura, who was clearly the team's weakest fighter. Naruto thought quickly about his options. Rasengan? No, they just needed to detain them. Naruto Renden? A quick self-assessment revealed that he didn't have enough chakra for 4 more Bunshin. A modified one at that time. Naruto sped up and formed a hand seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He had an odd sense of loneliness. Naruto turned back to the battle, shook off the rising heat in his cheeks, and bared his fangs as the blonde swung his head around, desperately trying to find his Bunshin. This is not the time to be embarrassed, he told himself, and jumped onto the back of one of the ninja attacking Sakura, kunai in hand. The ninja doubled over and threw Naruto off, who squinted into the sunlight before skidding to a halt and running at the ninja once more, leaping high into the air to gain momentum on the way down for a direct attack while raking the ground with his free hand for stability. Air. The ninja pushed Naruto away, swinging back his arms in a wide arc, and Naruto used the momentum to launch himself back into the air from his airborne view. He involuntarily evaluated the situation. Sakura had a ninja in an unceremoniously headlock. Kakashi and another ninja were dancing circles around each other. Another nin was tied to a tree, and Naruto shouted, raising his kunai with both hands. Naruto. Be careful. Unable to alter his course in midair, he raised his arms and braced himself for the blow, feeling blood on them as he heard Sasuke yell and saw a sickle attached to a heavy chain barreling his way. His bright blue eyes widened in panic. Not pain, though when Naruto landed, he saw Sasuke land next to him, holding the sickle in one hand and his thigh in the other. Bright, red blood trickled down his alabaster skin and seeped through Sasuke's pale khakis. Something deep inside his abdomen lurched, and he picked up the kunai that had grazed him and charged at the ninja who had thrown it at his blind spot moments earlier. He swung the kunai towards the ninja's head, and the opponent grabbed his wrist to block. His other hand fisted and slammed into the ninja's palm, which just managed to deflect the punch meant for his stomach. He yelled, hooked his legs around, and swept the ninja's feet from under him, and they both fell to the ground. After a while of struggle, Naruto ended up pinned to the ground with his hands behind him. As its owner reached for a weapon, the deep baritone spat, pathetic, it's over. With a weary smirk, Naruto arched his neck and glanced at his assailant after sensing a faintly familiar chakra signature. You're right. The ninja's jugular was struck by Kakashi's kunai, and it was Kakashi's voice. The ninja slowly raised his arms in surrender, but Kakashi quickly knocked him unconscious and tied him up. Naruto shakily got to his feet and watched as Sasuke used the enemy's own metal chain to secure the final ninja. The blonde lifted his dirty left palm slightly and looked down at it. The vow he had made seemingly forever ago echoing in his mind. His anger suddenly flared, and he stomped over to his teammate and shoved. I could have handled it, bastard. Sasuke was taken aback and gaped at the blonde for a moment before gathering himself and squinting. You're totally winded, dumbass. Naruto didn't need to be told. He sensed that his rival's patronizing remark only made him more irate, or at least it should have. Instead of asking for help, Naruto should have screamed back that Sasuke was a fool for hurting him, and he should have asked himself why this mission had taken so much of him while Sasuke stood there calmly, seemingly taunting him. Didn't he catch up? Didn't they fight evenly on the hospital roof? He gritted his teeth instead, distracted by the bright trails of crimson that covered Sasuke's left leg, and his fingers itched to dig their nails into the wound, while the rest of him felt a twinge of pleasure, his brain feeling angry and guilty that he was the reason his teammate was hurt. You're Kun Sasuke. Sakura rushed over to the boy, nearly knocking Naruto down. Are you okay? Are you in pain? Sakura felt Naruto's eye on them as she sat Sasuke down and reprimanded her crush out of concern. Geez, it's been so tense between those two, ever since. Sakura thought as Sasuke's piercing gaze lingered on Naruto before shifting to the fawning Kunoichi, who insisted on tending to his wound. Naruto's intense gaze on the blood was palpable to her. Sakura wrapped bandages around the cut and offered to comfort the blonde, saying, shallow wounds always look worse than they really are. Darn. Just gave up my excuse to make a fuss over Sasuke. Sakura thought sadly, I sure have gone soft on Naruto. Notwithstanding the slight hoarseness in his voice, Naruto acknowledged, why yeah. Kakashi walked over and observed his students, thinking, well, it looks like our Sakura has matured a little. Well done, everybody. As always, Sasuke has outstanding fighting abilities. You did well, Sakura, and it looks like you're headed toward becoming a great medic. The copy ninja paused, and Naruto winced, half thinking that Kakashi was merely pausing for dramatic effect. And Naruto, the Junin's eyes squinted to show a smile. We couldn't have done it without your diversion, good job. Let's move forward before the day is over. We want to return to Konoha and get these guys back to their village. Naruto hung back behind the team in silence, which was unusual for him, as Team 7 returned to Konoha after finishing their mission earlier that morning. Sakura turned to her teammates and grinned, saying, hey guys, let's stop for lunch. I made bentos. Sakura distributed pre-made lunches as they set up a picnic by the roadside, shaded by trees. Sakura held out a box and said, "Dig in, Naruto. And don't complain that it's not ramen," she added, hoping to get a response from her teammate. Naruto didn't answer, apparently preoccupied with some internal conversation, and the boy's expression of introspection was vexingly inappropriate. "Oh, Naruto." Sakura gestured with her hands before his face. "Well, oh, sorry Sakura-chan," Naruto said, rubbing the back of his neck to distract himself from his embarrassment. "But if it's okay with you, I think I'll pass. I could really use a nap," he said with a smile. Naruto then reluctantly got up and sat down under the shade between thick roots sticking out of the ground. "How are you feeling, Naruto?" Sakura dared to ask, a little worried. "Outstanding." He flexed his bicep to demonstrate his response, which was a bit too loud. "I guess working so hard on this mission really wore me out. However, nothing is insurmountable with a little sleep." His teammates saw his smile vanish as he dozed off. Sakura looked down absently at the rejected lunch and blinked in shock, saying, "Naruto never passes up food. He's been a little down lately, hasn't he?" Sasuke chewed at his food resolutely. Kakashi had already finished, repositioned his mask, and observed his students as they studied his book. Naruto was troubled by his performance earlier that morning, which had been subpar even considering that it was their first real mission since he checked out of the hospital. "How long has it been?" Naruto asked himself in frustration. "Almost 3 months. I should have recovered by now. What's wrong with me?" Sasuke's rude foot woke him up, and he reluctantly got up and took the lead, rubbing at his eyes, too sleepy and preoccupied to complain about the rough treatment. It's a question that has been bothering him. He's been feeling strangely empty, and his usual inextinguishable energy and resolve have all but vanished, leaving him in a daze. He felt wrong, and he was worried. In typical Uzumaki fashion, he's been overcompensating by deliberately acting like his old self, which includes talking too loudly, laughing too forcibly, and hurling insults at Sasuke, who hasn't said a single word in return since the falls. It's been exhausting, and today his usual limitless chakra reserve had been used up so quickly, so wildly out of his control. As Sasuke fell silently into step next to him, Naruto's sad eyes caught sight of a pair of sandals, and he instinctively prepared himself for an insult. But, strangely, it hurt more when it didn't arrive. The smell of metallic stung his nose painfully, and he looked again at the bloody sandal. He felt hot and shivered, wondering why things weren't going back to normal. He thought, "I'm still a liability." A picture of Sasuke collapsing in his arms on the bridge flashed through his mind. Is my resolve so weak? Am I so weak? He hated these thoughts, and he hated himself for having them. It's too unlike him. Gah, he thought, trying to grasp at his intangible muddle of feelings and thoughts. Heat and pressure surged up as though a giant claw had clamped down on his brain and squeezed, causing him to clutch at his head, his vision becoming blurry from the pain, until he noticed the storm in his stomach. These sensations weren't just physical. Naruto's confused mind was searching for Kyuubi. Sakura ran over to see what was wrong with Kakashi close behind, but Sasuke turned to face Naruto, who doubled over, trembling, one hand clutching his middle, the other fingers digging into his hair. "Remain back." Naruto suffocated. Kakashi had never been this close before, and his eyes widened at the sight of this chakra. Naruto pulsed with an energy that felt vaguely familiar and inexplicably frightening. What the hell is going on? His Sharingan blazed, and he cursed himself for not having Hyugan eyes. Instead, Sasuke gritted his teeth, not knowing what to do. Naruto struggled to his knees. "Remain put." Sasuke and Sakura, the two young shinobi, turned to their sensei for guidance as they moved to assist their teammate in response to Kakashi's command. As he attempted to analyze the situation, Kakashi thought, "The chakra isn't as strong as the other times, but it's as wild as that first time with Zabuza's kid. But what's the trigger?" Sakura thought. Kakashi's silence went on forever, and when she could no longer stand hearing Naruto's stifled cries, she approached him once more. To do what, she wasn't sure. "Avoid it." It was Sasuke's voice this time, a bit hoarser than normal. "You have no idea what that can do. How can we just stand here, Sasuke-kun?" Sakura came back frantically, saying, "There's a problem. People who don't care about their friends are worse than trash, aren't they? We must take action. I shouldn't tell them about the 9 tails if I can help it. Naruto, get a hold of yourself." Kakashi firmly ignored the allusion to his own lesson and retorted, "Sasuke's right. A ninja doesn't enter a situation without information." Sakura embraced herself tightly, anxious and agitated. When the team members heard Naruto gasp for air, the tension between them was relieved. His teammates cautiously approached, but Naruto remained motionless on the ground, panting and half-lidded, thankful that the ground was solid beneath him. as the strange chakra seemed to implode back into his body as abruptly as it had appeared, and he fell on his side from exhaustion. "Hi, Naruto? Are you all right?" Sakura tentatively extended her hand. Naruto dismissed her hand and remarked, "I'm fine, I can get up myself." "That dummy. I was trying to be nice because I'm worried." Sakura stepped back in surprise, then became angry. Her features softened as she watched Naruto shakily stand up. Remembering the time Lee collapsed during training at the hospital, why do boys have to be so stubborn, she thought sadly. Kakashi looked at his youngest student and said, "All right, if everything is okay, we should keep moving." He turned to face the road, saying, "That boy isn't in the mood to talk right now, but how long should I wait? That was the Kyuubi's chakra, wasn't it? If the seal is unstable, there could be trouble. No, the sooner I confirm my suspicions, the better. Remain here for a minute, Sakura and Sasuke, come with me, Naruto." Reluctantly, Kakashi and Naruto left the road, and when they were out of sight of the others, Kakashi turned to face his pupil. "So, is there anything I need to be aware of?" Despite his best efforts, Naruto was unable to look Kakashi in the eye, which further perplexed him. Naruto took a breath to defiantly deny anything was wrong, but the word, "no," caught in his throat. Even if it were true, this child would obviously not acknowledge Kyuubi, who has suffered greatly as a result. Kakashi knelt down to face Naruto directly, needing to get Naruto to concentrate. "You're not in trouble, Naruto, however, please inform me right away if anything is unusual. I will not pass judgment on you." He kept all of his doubts, fears, and struggles inside, but he still resisted. A ninja does not show weakness, so he could not show them. He stole a covert glance over his shoulder at his teammates. Naruto was bursting to say something, anything. The sharp eye of Kakashi did not miss it. Kakashi placed his hands on Naruto's shoulders and said, "Naruto, what you say is between us only. You can trust me." His sensei went on, "If anything feels." Naruto uncontrollably shuddered at the light touch, and something inside him broke. A knot formed in his throat. "It doesn't feel." Kakashi gave Naruto a moment to gather himself before he finished in a hoarse whisper, "Right?" Naruto blurted loudly, shocking himself. "Go on." Naruto gritted his teeth and tried not to think about what was truly bothering him. Just now, it felt like Kyuubi tried to take over. That's what Kakashi-sensei wants, right? That was the answer, right? It's the Kyuubi no Kitsune, as I suspected, Kakashi thought. What, just now? Kakashi-sensei, I'm going crazy. I don't think there's more of the demon in me. Naruto interrupted, causing Kakashi to furrow his brow in concern as he felt the young boy tremble beneath his hand. Now that the floodgates were open, the words poured out beyond his control. "I think there's just less of me. Something's wrong, and I'm not sure what it is," he said. "I feel completely wrong. It's as if my body were alive, but I wasn't." Naruto was never good with words, especially when he needed them badly. "I feel completely different." Naruto trailed off. "I feel like I've..." He was startled to discover a tear on his cheek and wiped it away angrily. Having no idea what to do, Kakashi simply wanted to know if it was the Kyuubi and come up with a plan to deal with it. He hadn't anticipated that his student would share such personal information with him, but as he gazed at the distressed boy, he felt sorry for him and compelled to console him in a manner he wished he could have done for his important people before they had all abandoned him. "Kun Sasuke? What do you suppose they're discussing?" Sasuke glared at Sakura, thinking, "You've got to be kidding." He crossed his arms, glanced back at the two in the distance, and almost choked. Kakashi had just gathered Naruto into an embrace. Sakura said exactly what he felt. When Kakashi gave him an awkward hug, Naruto let his arms hang at his side in silent rejection, surprised. But Kakashi held him tightly as if to reassure him that he was there for him, and the boy slowly wrapped his arms around the Junin's shoulder blades while squeezing his eyes shut. Kakashi's shoulder began to dampen, and he wondered hazily if he had it all wrong, or if it was just his imagination. His practical mind began to analyze the situation instinctively, as he was no stranger to trauma and its effects. If the stress on their bodies and their mutual silence around the taboo subject were any indication, it had to have been intense. Disconnection from the self and losing awareness of the present are common symptoms. Just now, did Naruto experience a flashback? Kakashi furrowed his brows, trying to recall the recent event from memory. No, the aura was weak, but I'm almost positive it was the Nine-Tails chakra. In any case, if Naruto lacks the mental capacity to help contain it, this complicates things with the Kyuubi. I'll need to tell the Sannin. Beneath his mask, Kakashi smiled. "Hey, no concerns. I refuse to allow my teammates to suffer, you understand?" As two perplexed genin watched, Naruto's hold on Kakashi's vest grew stronger. A wizened man in a rare moment of quiet reflection nursed his sake as the sun set over Fire Country. The sky blushing brilliantly behind the stone faces of the Hokage Jiraiya looked over his cup and saw Team 7 enter the village gates, drinking the remainder of his drink and leaving a few coins on the table. Hey! With his hands on his hips, Jiraiya walked up to the four and waved and grinned, asking if it was already his turn to take these two. Kakashi smiled back and said, "Come on now, Jiraiya-san. Give these guys the night to recover, won't you?" "What is that? They still have a long way to go, which is understandable," Jiraiya jokingly said. "You're too easy on them." The Sannin turned to face Naruto and said, "Hey kid, won't you even greet your sensei?" "Yo!" Jiraiya gave a small frown before Jiraiya could say another word. Kakashi turned to his team and said, "Take the night off guys." "Oh, but I'm their sensei for today," he said. "All right." After Sakura said, "Good night, Kakashi-sensei, Jiraiya-sama," the three went to their separate houses. In the distance, the two seasoned ninja observed the children getting smaller. "Kakashi, do you have something to say to me?" After a moment of silence, Kakashi casually slipped his hands into his pockets. "Well, I guess there's no helping it, Jiraiya-san," the Junin replied. "I'm a little worried about Naruto." "Yes, we are all, aren't we? I'm serious." "So am I, but go on. I thought I felt the Nine Tails chakra from Naruto today." "Isn't that to be expected? I taught him how to use it." Jiraiya was aware that assisting Naruto in accessing the Kyuubi's chakra couldn't be widely known or even discussed among those who were aware of it, but it still annoyed him a little that no one took credit for his contribution to Naruto's increasing power. "Yes, but he had no control over how I felt." Kakashi looked up at the fading sky and said, "The amount that Naruto emitted was slight, but the chakra signature was undoubtedly Kyuubi's." He paused, then added, "And another thing." Just to make sure Jiraiya was still paying attention, Kakashi said. Naruto expressed a sense of detachment from himself. "I think he might be dealing with a mental health issue. Has he spoken to you yet?" "No." The Sannin folded his arms thoughtfully across his chest, "but I wouldn't be shocked because ninjutsu does require a high level of concentration. He has been having more difficulty than usual for the time being. We have been concentrating on regaining his physical endurance." "I'll keep an eye out, kid," Jiraiya said, locking eyes with Kakashi. After saying, "Thank you, Jiraiya-san," Kakashi nodded and vanished into the night. Sasuke walked slowly back to his apartment. When he wasn't in a rush, he always took the side streets, which gave him privacy and kept him away from the Uchiha neighborhood, where he used to live. Lately, he's taken even more off the beaten path detours to avoid having to deal with neighbors. He detested the rumors of his betrayal to Konoha, taunts that he lacked the courage to pursue, and eyes that implicated him for trying to kill a leaf shinobi. No, he thought to himself, for trying to murder my only. He was unable to finish the thought. He had never in his life imagined that there could be anything worse than being viewed with compassion, but now he felt like a heartless beast. He could deal with the physical, external world, easily, but he was never good at dealing with the mental, internal world, so it was strange that Sasuke almost wished people knew what he had done. Of course, it was all in his head, and no one outside of those directly involved in stopping his defection knew it had ever happened. Information about the event was classified to preserve the image of stability of the weakened shinobi force, but it didn't make it any less real in Sasuke's mind. Before he knew it, Sasuke was outside his door. He let out a breath, turned the knob, and stepped into the empty apartment, which was sparsely furnished, impersonal, and unadorned. The coldness of the place made him shiver a little, and as he leaned over a dresser to close the window, he stopped to glance at the back of a picture frame. It took him some time after leaving the hospital to even stand the frame upright, and he hasn't turned it back around yet. Unbidden, a vision of Naruto's drooping head and red, swollen eyes from the trip home earlier that day flashed through his mind as Sasuke carefully picked up the picture frame and flipped it over in his hands, causing the frame to tremble. "What on earth is wrong with you, fool?" The bright morning sky was tainted by startled birds. Whop! The wooden training post in the wooded clearing was kicked. Whop whop whack, roundhouse, fist, and palm. Naruto took a deep breath and dropped into a stance. Naruto closed his eyes and focused. I need to push myself further. I need to reach a point where I can train with chakra once more. This week, a Rasengan was slammed into the post by him. "All right, let's try it once more." Jiraiya and Sasuke were training just out of sight of the clearing, and Jiraiya noticed that Naruto was less distracted when he couldn't see him teach Sasuke more complicated jutsu while he was assigned to basic skills. Sasuke picked himself up off the ground with a heave in his chest. Jiraiya had banned the Sharingan from Genjutsu training, and Sasuke couldn't see how the Sannin was creating the illusions, so he braced himself and turned to face the frog hermit. "Where is it?" Jiraiya abruptly rippled and vanished like a mirage. "Oh no. What time?" Sasuke was surrounded by a dozen Jiraiya's who were throwing shuriken at him, so he instinctively leapt up and used his kunai to deflect the attacks. Metal clanged against metal, and 3 of his own shuriken vanished in a puff of smoke. Cage Bunshin still in the air. Sasuke barely saw the Sannin approaching from below and swiftly performed a series of Seal's Kaden Gokakyu no Jutsu. He sent a huge fireball at the Sannin, but it didn't dodge. Instead, several kunai shot out from the smoke and flames. Too late to defend himself. Sasuke raised his arms protectively to his face. A blade grazed his thigh, and another grazed his upper arm. Blood trickled from his fingertips as Sasuke landed and grabbed the stinging wound on his arm, but the corners of his lips tugged upward. Well, it's time for some actual sparring. If I want to defeat that guy, I need to get stronger offensively. Where is he? Check left, right, above, behind, below. What is that? Sasuke was alone in the clearing when a weird, hot feeling started to creep down his injured arm. Shaking, Sasuke saw that the same was happening to his cut thigh, and he blanched as he looked down at his arm, where the cut was growing and slithering like a snake down to his palm, his skin tearing and peeling off to reveal the glistening, bloody muscles underneath. Sasuke was frozen in terror as an army of black insects suddenly swarmed out of the nearby woods and began eating the skin that had fallen to the ground. Fortunately, he was diverted by a movement in his peripheral vision, and Jiraiya emerged from hiding and was now observing the genin with a serious expression. When Sasuke realized that his flesh peeling off didn't hurt nearly as much as it should have, he instantly clasped his hands together and focused. Jiraiya's voice reverberated in Sasuke's mind as she said, with Genjutsu, the attacker is controlling the chakra flow in your brain. When caught in an illusion, you must disrupt this flow. Use the same control you developed in the tree walking and water walking exercises, but this time, instead of gathering chakra to one region, you are directing it away. Bugs began crawling up Sasuke's legs, and he felt a tickle on his calf, forcing himself to focus and resist the urge to spasm. You want an irregular flow instead of a steady one, ah. Sasuke's leg was burning, and he knew without looking that the bugs were beginning to feed, so he clenched his jaw shut to stop himself from yelling aloud. What else did that hermit say? Jiraiya's voice drifted out of his memory once more. It's just Genjutsu, it's just Genjutsu, Sasuke repeated in his mind. This is why working in a team is crucial against an enemy that uses Genjutsu. If you're caught, someone from the outside can disrupt the flow for you. The bugs were climbing up Sasuke's neck and threatening to get into his mouth, and he tilted his chin to the sky, as if breaking the surface of water, because the itching and burning were getting to be too much for him to handle. Move. He told himself move. He retrieved a kunai from his weapons pouch with a trembling hand. Move. When Sasuke's red eyes opened, he began to pant in a cold sweat and realized that a kunai was stuck in his thigh, causing his knuckles to turn white. He grunted and pulled the kunai out of his thigh. Then he sat down to bandage his self-inflicted wound, ignoring Jiraiya as he came closer. Interesting, Jiraiya said. You used that knowledge to get yourself out of a tight spot after remembering that things that happen in the outside world can affect a Genjutsu's hold. Kid, you'll get credit for that, but that's cheating. During training you may have to use physical pain to get out of a tight spot in real life, but your goal in training is to learn how to do it without hurting yourself. You understand? I'm an Avenger. I'm wasting my time learning these stupid defensive techniques. I just need to be stronger than that man, Sasuke said, listening to the lecture with mild annoyance. Yes, I do comprehend. However, I know enough to get by. Sasuke paused and said, Sir, what I really need is to get stronger and to develop my offensive. Jiraiya's eye twitched a little. Sasuke was just as stubborn and single-minded as Naruto, but the Uchiha somehow got on his nerves. Naruto was condescending and demanding, which belied his lack of social experience and guidance, which the Sannin found charming. Sasuke's cool and forced politeness only made the boy's arrogance seem worse. He reminded him of Orochimaru. Brant, don't get ahead of yourself. Sasuke gave him a disbelieving look. If I didn't build on your strengths, I'd be a bad teacher. What do you think that Sharingan is good for? Jiraiya's lips tensed. Discipline. His response was, the advantage of foresight and insight. What's the benefit, then? Are these dumb questions really coming from this guy? Faster reaction and an understanding of the enemy's techniques to use to my advantage. For defense. Sasuke was a little taken aback by Jiraiya's tone, which was that of a teacher weary of waiting for the right response. Pay close attention, child. The offensive party launches an attack and foresees the retaliation. However, in order to enable the counterattack, the Sharingan is designed to detect the attack first. Jiraiya allowed the words to sink in, saying, the Uchiha were the founders and keepers of Konoha's police force. The Sharingan's strength is in reacting, not acting. Sasuke, they weren't our offensive force. They were our first line of defense and the keeper of order for a reason. Sasuke thought bitterly, was the police force. But he had to admit that what the Sannin said made sense, which only made him angrier. Jiraiya watched as the boy in front of him tightened his jaw and stared at the ground. Let me work on other techniques already, Kami-sama. The truth was that Sasuke detested being helpless and hated having things happen to him. His mind was filled with memories of his past, where he had watched helplessly as his brother, no, he never wanted to feel helpless again, made decisions. Sasuke knew that they were working on genjutsu defense to protect himself against Itachi's attacks. In fact, he wanted it. He just didn't realize how much he would hate it. Weak offensive techniques. He could work on them, feel himself moving forward, see tangible results. It reinforced his strength. But defensive techniques? His poor performance just served to remind him how weak he was, especially against genjutsu. But you've done good work today, Jiraiya said, continuing where he left off, and the Sannin smirked as he squatted down purposefully into a fighting stance. Jiraiya's audible sigh interrupted Sasuke's reverie. How about you just try and get a hit in? As he dropped into position, Sasuke grinned back. He would love nothing more than to release some of his pent-up energy on his new foolish sensei, who too much reminded him of Naruto. With their fists poised, the student and teacher charged at each other. Sasuke swung, almost tripped, and launched himself from the ground with his other hand, flipping and landing with a skid. What the hell was that? Jiraiya had also stopped, both of them distracted by a massive surge of energy coming from another area of the woods. A painful scream broke the silence, and they both ran wordlessly towards the clearing where Naruto was training. Flying quickly through the trees, Sasuke and Jiraiya noticed a tiny orange shape on the clearing's floor through the foliage. Both of them unconsciously accelerated, unsure of what to anticipate. Except for Naruto, who was squatting low on all fours, the clearing was deserted and undisturbed. It would have appeared to be just another training session if it weren't for the scream and the chakra explosion that had occurred just moments earlier. The teacher and student landed and cautiously approached. Sasuke never completed his question. Hey, you. Sasuke felt himself hurled backwards into a tree before he could even notice Naruto lifting his head to display red eyes and bared fangs. More shocked than hurt, he collapsed to the ground. When Sasuke looked up in response to a savage scream, he saw Naruto in midair, descending on him with yet another blow. He braced himself to block Jiraiya's jump kick that knocked Naruto off balance. Jiraiya was now avoiding violent swipes from Naruto's claw-like hands. He was a little taken aback that he was actually perspiring, and he was also a little alarmed by how fierce the attacks were. How can I defeat him without causing him any harm? Oi, Naruto. It's me and Sasuke. Snap out of it. Really? He pondered. Naruto abruptly vanished. Jiraiya glanced around him hastily. Where? He looked down too late. After sensing something beneath him, Jiraiya was launched into the air when a fist struck the Sannin's chin in midair. He flipped and landed on one knee. After gathering his bearings, a number of wire-tied kunai passed uncomfortably near his face. Naruto stumbled and fell to the ground on his stomach while bound by the wires. Jiraiya rolled out from underneath and ducked as Sasuke jerked the wires tight. Sasuke shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" At his teammate at last, Sasuke noticed that Naruto's entire face had an animalistic appearance. As he raised his head, the marks on Naruto's cheeks and his canines appeared more noticeable than ever, if that were possible. Sasuke, however, was captivated by the eyes. They were red as fire. That moment in the forest of death was exactly like that. Are you okay? A scaredy cat? This time, however, his eyes were filled with pure hatred rather than taunts. As he fought against the wires holding his arms to his side, Naruto managed to stand up. Sasuke sensed that Naruto was being surrounded by a powerful chakra. The cat's eyes never left Sasuke and Naruto's. It grinned. When Sasuke realized, his dark eyes widened. We're not his target. He's going after me. In order to free his hands to form seals, he pulled on the wires once more and held them taut with his teeth, breaking his bonds. Naruto charged at Sasuke. Gokakyu, no, just you, Kaden said while the wires were still floating to the ground. Sasuke sent a flame down them unflinching. Naruto leapt and dashed through the flames. Weak. Where's the intent to kill now, Sasuke-chan? The tease was dripping with resentment and hatred, and the voice was harsh. Sasuke felt sick to his stomach at the words. Sasuke was distracted, avoiding a swipe that was just a fraction of a second too slow, and he was nicked beneath the rib cage by sharp claws encircled by burning chakra. Sasuke flew and crashed to the ground as a result of it. As red chakra that was now visible to the naked eye began to bubble and envelop Naruto, Jiraiya hurried at the possessed boy. I didn't anticipate needing these so quickly. Naruto! Exclaimed the elderly man. A paper seal slammed onto the boy's forehead as he turned. Naruto's vulpine face and his drooping, dulled blue eyes returned to normal almost immediately. Panting, he collapsed forward on his hands and knees. Naruto was utterly worn out and confused, and he had no idea why what took place. It's really hot. His fingers touched a piece of paper on his forehead as he raised his hand to wipe it. He succeeded. Seal. It resembled the one in front of Kyuubi's cage exactly. What a waste. Naruto took a sharp breath and then jerked his head up, which caused him to feel lightheaded once more. Sasuke and Jiraiya stood back, warily observing him. Even though Sasuke was calm, he breathed heavily, and they both appeared more worn out. His thigh was now covered in 2 bandages, one of which had blood leaking from a new wound. His trademark blue shirt had a tear in it, and the edges were burned. The flesh beneath was a purple red of rage. Blue eyes met black, embarrassed. Naruto pushed back into a training post. He knew what had happened without having to remember. The crumpled seal became wet in Naruto's sweaty palm. His gaze, it is similar to every villager. His jaws were clenched so tightly that they might have broken and prevented the tears from streaming down his face. As Naruto reached back to his weapons pouch, Jiraiya and Sasuke watched in anticipation with hesitation and slowness. Naruto pulled out a kunai. Sasuke tightened his jaw and repositioned himself in combat. He caught Jiraiya doing the same out of the corner of his eye. Is he still not himself even though his body language has changed? As he attempted to predict the first move, he wondered. He is trembling. Does he even have self-control over his body? What will it be? Sasuke waited while Naruto brought the weapon up painfully slowly while holding it blade down with both hands. What move does he have in mind? Sasuke winced uncontrollably as a flash of pain shot from the wound on his side when Naruto saw. His terrified eyes transformed into the recognizable ones of unyielding resolve. He swung down the blade, yelled, and closed them tightly. Bam! With his thick forearms pressed against his student's throat and the kunai-wielding hand pinned above the blonde's head, Jiraiya suddenly slammed Naruto against the post. The blade twisted and hit the floor with a dull thud. Jiraiya was furious and said, "Idiot! Is that what you want? Huh? You think there's any honor in that?" Sasuke immediately recognized the tone as that of an irate parent. It's a poor way to repay those who gave their lives for you. Sasuke's gaze widened now. He got it. His body trembled as he gazed intently at the ground, seeing nothing. Crash. Thwump. Sasuke has no recollection of him and Naruto storming through the training post. He felt totally out of himself in an emotional adrenaline rush he hadn't experienced since the battle at the falls. It wasn't his arms holding a struggling Naruto to a tree by the shoulders. His voice was not yelling at his comrade. The eyes of Naruto were as wide with fear as those of a trapped animal. What the hell is the matter with you? The Naruto I know would never be such a coward. What's changed, huh? Sasuke's grip on his survival instincts alone caused him to writhe wildly. Guilt now completed the flurry of feelings that were raging inside Sasuke. He gripped harder. The Sannin said, "Sasuke, that's enough." But Sasuke didn't pay any attention to him. With one eye closed and a wince, Naruto remained silent. Sasuke was going crazy over it. "Answer me. Damn it. I could be your worst nightmare or your best friend at this point." Sasuke's eyes were watering and stinging. "To ease the pain, I despise him. He's brought me to tears twice now." Despite his anger, he noticed with curiosity that Naruto's pupils dilated as he felt him stop writhing beneath his hand. Naruto lunged forward and gasped as Sasuke was about to panic after the blonde stopped breathing. However, Sasuke had no time to feel relieved. A scream rang out through the woods for the second time that day. Naruto heard yelling. At first it was barely audible, far away, but it got louder and louder. The sounds became louder and more frantic, and he could hear crashing, yelling, and the crackle of fire. Naruto saw red when he looked into a stranger's eyes. It was the red of a raging fire that was licking Konoha's dark sky and consuming buildings. It was the red of dark blood seeping from corpses scattered across the filthy floor. He could see the red of a strong chakra radiating from his own body. His own physique. Naruto was inside the fox's body. He was aware of 2 souls, his own and the beast's, simultaneously, which was a terrifying feeling without his natural human body, which was composed of only chakra and malice. He felt weightless. However, every step and tail swipe caused the ground to tremble through ruthless, giggling eyes. He saw people being flung around and ripped to pieces as buildings fell apart. Naruto yelled for the beast inside to stop until it was only yelling. Days seemed to pass while the carnage goes on. The fact that he enjoyed it, however, was what scared him the most. It was getting more and more difficult to distinguish between the Kyuubi. In his mind he was unable to distinguish between excitement and embarrassment. He wasn't sure if he was calling for more or for everything to stop. He wondered absently when everything had gone gray and red. It got dark suddenly. Naruto was sitting on his haunches in black emptiness, feeling human once more, but he was illuminated somehow. Naruto felt uncomfortable in his human form as he observed his clawed hands. Iruka looked slightly off, as though she were in the spotlight. He propped himself up with an arm and lay on his side. He was obviously in pain and his ankle was torn. Naruto advanced a step. Pressed despite the pain, Iruka closed his eyes and grinned. Naruto, I'm so glad you're here. Press, Naruto? Press? Naruto squatted, tilted his head, and gave Iruka a questioning, feline gaze. His face lit up with a threatening smile. He noticed Iruka trembling. His terrified, wide eyes were fixed on Naruto's. Get away. Naruto felt something stirring in the pit of his stomach. The Chunin's fear was getting to him like crazy. No. As it vanished, another aspect of Naruto gave a weak protest. Iruka's torso began to convulse as Naruto slowly and deliberately put a hand on it to ensure that Iruka recognized him. He maintained eye contact. He was Naruto. Naruto was the one tearing up his stomach and allowing the viscera to splatter all over him. Naruto got to his feet and screamed until his diaphragm failed. Staring down at the Chunin, he saw his muscles tremble and his beloved sensei gasp in agony. The crimson life seeped out, discoloring his mousy hair as it gathered around his body, and he watched his breathing slow. He watched as Iruka died over the course of 3 hours, and he grinned as he watched. Sasuke gasped in shock and terror as he saw the boy yelling beneath his grasp. In the clearing, confusion replaced his anger. What the devil? The familiar faces of Naruto surrounded him one by one. Kiba, Choji, Hinata, Konohamaru. Naruto bit their necks and ripped at their flesh. Neji, Shikamaru, Tsunade, Jiraiya. His friends' cries filled the black emptiness. Digging his hand into their wounds, he reveled in his victims' cries for death as he killed them, sometimes tortuously, slowly. Sometimes the darkness was red with the color of warm blood, and they were dead before they hit the floor. Kakashi, Sakura, Sasuke. Naruto stood over Sasuke's head, watching him die, blood trickling from his claws. Their eyes met, one glazed and dulled with icy indifference, the other gleaming brightly with horror and bewilderment. A gargle of blood drowned out Sasuke's attempt to speak before hot, coppery breath blew at Sasuke's ears. Naruto knelt over the boy's head and leaned in close. Don't you remember, Sasuke? There's no need for words? Naruto stabbed his thumbs into the eye sockets, causing the pinwheeled eyes to widen in horror. Sasuke's mangled hands clawed at Naruto's as he screamed and choked as Sasuke's body writhed and bucked on the ground. The Kyuubi boy held the Uchiha down, hands over his mouth and nose, thumbs in his sockets. Long after the body had cooled and become motionless, Naruto kept him there. Jiraiya had taken a moment to comprehend the situation across the clearing. Sasuke had pinned Naruto against a tree. After tackling him, Naruto began yelling and bucking against the trunk. As the Sannin was halfway to his students, Jiraiya suddenly materialized next to Sasuke, who appeared paralyzed with terror. He had blood-red eyes. Naruto slammed into a pole after abruptly jerking backwards as though he were being violently pulled from behind. Ropes bound his wrists, and his arms crashed spread eagle on either side. All of a sudden, he was internally burning as Kyuubi was being torn from his body. He could hear the fox's deep, savage roar in his ears. Then he was sore, sweating, panting, and empty. An eternity later, Naruto opened his eyes and raised his ponderous head. If it hadn't been red, it would have been blue. Slowly, a crowd of people moved forward. He recognized his comrades and friends from the village. When he saw that none of them had legs, he nearly grinned at their appearance. They floated closer, their bodies trailing off into a wispy tail. They were the dead people's ghosts. Naruto's mind was flooded with memories. He saw himself killing people and terrorizing the village as though he were outside of himself as he tortured his friends to death. He witnessed the sadistic joy on his face. However, Kyuubi left him. Naruto was by himself, the full weight of horror and guilt taking the place of the missing half of his soul. All of you. As Naruto hung helplessly on a crucifix, the dead alternately clubbed him with blunt weapons and impaled him with swords. Wish you were never born, Naruto. How could you? I was a fool to trust you. I am solely to blame. His body resisted death. His wounds sizzled as they healed even without Kyuubi, and the black bruises vanished nearly immediately after they first appeared, but his beaten body throbbed and the pain persisted. You really believe that we could choose our fate? Then, I guess you chose to be a monster who kills his comrades. Naruto glanced up just in time to see Neji before his face was impeccably struck by a fist. His cheek was slapped with heat. Sakura stabbed Naruto in the stomach with a kunai, saying, "You promised." Naruto looked into Iruka's disillusioned eyes and said, "I guess I was wrong." His own tear-stained eyes begged for forgiveness. Iruka walked away, turning his back. "I'm a monster. This is something I deserve. Why didn't you notice sooner? I needed you to help me." Now, looking into the sockets where Sasuke's eyes should have been, Naruto shuddered in horror. "I'm so s." "Shut up, loser." Naruto heard birds yelling and noticed an electric glow beneath him. Sasuke said, "It doesn't matter," with a sly grin. "We were never friends anyway." A burning sensation went through Naruto's chest. "Sasuke, let go." At Jiraiya's voice, Sasuke jolted out of his reverie and staggered back, letting go of Naruto's shoulders with a thud. The blonde fell to the ground, and aside from Sasuke's labored breathing, the forest was quiet once more. With the trunk supporting his back, Naruto sat with his head lowered on his chest and his eyes half open, lifeless, and his jaw dropped a little. Sasuke forced his breathing to slow as Sannin and Uchiha cautiously walked up. "Nah, Naruto?" The blonde hair was tousled by a gentle breeze. "I don't think he can hear us, kid." Sasuke's normally composed expression vanished as he gave Jiraiya a desperate glance. What the hell just happened? For a moment, as though recalling a memory, Jiraiya's eyes lingered on Sasuke before returning to Naruto's prone position. "Naruto, he looks a lot like how you were that time, at the inn." "How did I feel? What does that signify?" The cryptic remark caused Sasuke to gape a little, wondering what the Sannin might mean. "What time were we?" Sasuke recalled pinwheeled eyes and pleading for his nightmare to end when he suddenly saw his brother standing in the inn's hallway, pinning him against the wall and whispering in his ear, "You don't have enough hate? Not possible." Sasuke clenched his jaw. "Where is he? Where is who?" "Itachi." Sasuke's anger was about to erupt, triggered only by the memory of his brother. "Where the hell is he?" Jiraiya gave Sasuke a narrowed look. Sasuke waited for him to say, "He's not responsible for this. I'm just suggesting that Naruto was subjected to a powerful genjutsu, Sasuke." Sasuke froze as he realized the implication of the Sannin's statement. "Who?" he stammered, pointing firmly at Blonde. You'd think I'd do something like that to that clumsy idiot." "Wouldn't be the first time." Sasuke dropped his hands to his sides, his fists trembling, and Jiraiya watched his dark hair covered his face as his head hung low. Jiraiya sighed and his face softened. "He doesn't know that, kid." "Perhaps I was too severe in order for Sasuke to see him." He knelt. Sasuke didn't respond. "Hey, I'm sorry, kid, that was uncalled for." They both looked at their still unconscious teammate and said, "I'm not sure what just happened, but the important thing is that it stopped." Sasuke hoped for a comforting smile from Jiraiya as she said, "Let me check for additional injuries, then we'll get you both to the hospital." The tense atmosphere was briefly relieved when Jiraiya made a theatrical gesture and Sasuke started to perspire. "Don't worry, we've got Tsunade Hyuga after all, and she's one of the legendary Sannin and to be grouped with me. The great and powerful Master Jiraiya the Toad Hermit is saying something," Jiraiya said. Jiraiya carefully cradled Naruto in his arms and laid him on the grass as gently as his large hands would allow. "Okay. Let's get to it then." Hyuga. Naruto's eyes squinted as his body lurched, his fingers twitching in a spasm and his back arching. Jiraiya almost let him fall in shock in the blink of an eye. The boy's body relaxed once more, his head lolling to one side and his torso settling back on the grass. "What? Is it possible?" In a flash, Jiraiya unzipped Naruto's jacket and pulled up the faded black t-shirt underneath. His eyes widened in shock. The seal was invisible, and Naruto's abdomen was clean. "Not the Kyuubi, is it?" Naruto's body arched off the ground once more. Jiraiya placed his ears against Naruto's chest and spread his hand across the boy's stomach. Although he wasn't an expert in medicine, he knew enough to be unhappy with what he discovered. Urgently, he jerked his head up. He said to Sasuke, who had collapsed on his hands and knees beside his teammate, "I think he's still caught in the genjutsu, and whatever he's experiencing mentally is somehow manifesting itself physically. We're dealing with internally inflicted injuries." Still apprehended, Sasuke gave Naruto a shoulder shake and said, "Oi, hey loser. Wake up." The blonde grimaced at the invisible pain and clamped his eyes shut in exasperation. Sasuke closed his eyes and said, "Wake up, goddammit. There is nothing I can do." He lifted his fists, preparing to slap the foolish boy across the face, saying, "Wake the fuck up. If there was an enemy I could." "Sasuke." To the Sannin, Sasuke turned. "I need you to find Tsunade, fill her in and have her ready at the hospital stat." With a sobering nod, Sasuke vanished. Sasuke's legs burned as he flew, the air whistling around his ears. "You're not hateful enough." Sasuke thought of Jiraiya's harsh, accusing eyes. He knitted his brows. "You mean there's no way?" "All I felt was anger. Genjutsu cannot be cast without knowledge." Bastard Sannin. He thought of the strange breakdown he had experienced yesterday after the mission, and the unusually red feline eyes he had seen moments earlier. "It's not my fault that Naruto is having problems." However, as he hurried to Hokage Tower, an uneasy weight descended into the pit of his stomach. With her head resting on her knuckles, Tsunade idly twiddled her ink brush. 3 A-rank missions have been finished this morning. Team Kurenai reported in with a C-rank mission completed. 2 people were hurt when a B-rank mission was cancelled. What I wouldn't give for sake at this moment, geez. A disturbance outside the corridor broke the Sanin's slumber. Shouting and footsteps became more audible. She braced herself, but was still taken aback when Uchiha, accompanied by Chunin guards, stormed into her office. Hokage-sama. Sasuke fought against the Chunin that restrained his arms. Hokage-sama, it's Naruto. Release him. The genin almost staggered out of his liberty. It's Naruto, he exclaimed, gasping for air as the suture in his side made his wound worse. Please, come to the hospital. As Tsunade pushed him to the hospital bed, Jiraiya heard the door behind him slam and found himself on the chilly hospital floor. Any new developments? Jiraiya slowly got to his feet, massaging his aching butt. None. Naruto's body reacts sporadically to something. From what I can infer, he was under genjutsu and there's some internal damage, but I can't be sure that the two are connected. In agreement, Tsunade grunted. The medic's hand hovered over Naruto's body and said, "There." Tsunade looked up at Jiraiya and Sasuke's worried faces as they listened intently. I've never seen anything like it. Most genjutsu is used to cause psychological damage, or to immobilize the victim while physical damage is inflicted upon them from the outside. She permitted a tiny smile to appear on her lips. Don't look so worried, you two. It's nothing I can't fix. What can you tell us about Naruto's condition, Tsunade? As she continued her treatment, Tsunade made an effort to verbalize her observations without becoming distracted. As you know, genjutsu works on all 5 senses and creates an alternate reality experienced by the victim in their mind. However, most genjutsu disorients by creating situations to cause confusion and fear. Whatever technique Naruto is under, the disrupted chakra patterns of the jutsu which attack the mind is also sending signals to retroactively stimulate pain receptors in the nerves, causing his body to react physically. There's no actual damage to the organs besides fatigued muscles from the spasms, but the pain is real. What's even more strange is that the genjutsu is continuing, albeit weaker, even after the source is cut off, meaning that the suffering can go on indefinitely until someone or the victim themselves releases the jutsu. Tsunade's lips were parted. How inhumane. Both of her listeners were silent, with Sasuke fixed intently on Naruto and Jiraiya nodding solemnly. While she was speaking, Naruto's inert body appeared to come back to life. Anyway, she added, once the jutsu is released and the normal chakra flow is restored, everything should be fine. There. A blue eye opened and blearily attempted to get used to the light. Naruto's vision was erratic, alternating between the black and red of the nightmare that had long been his reality and bright light and green spirit. Sasuke came closer. Why didn't you recognize my suffering earlier? Naruto? The diminutive voice of the real Sasuke carried a hint of relief. Naruto was exhausted and felt weak in the pit of his stomach. Rumbled a completely different disturbance. It was too familiar for comfort, but he couldn't place it. In his confused state his skin began to shine with sweat, and his breathing became labored. The voice reverberated in the recesses of his mind as he closed his eyes once more. What stopped me? How dare you call me your friend when you've left me with nothing? Hokage-sama. It's just a side effect from being under the jutsu so long, Tsunade replied to Sasuke without raising her gaze. Godem leaned over Naruto and looked serious. Naruto. He took a deep breath. Naruto, who did this to you? Naruto shivered, strained a little, and struggled to speak, letting out a strangled sound. The three of them waited anxiously. Mentor, sister, and teammate. SSA, Suke. Naruto wasn't done, but Sasuke's heart fell to the pit of his stomach. I'm sorry. What? Tsunade became concerned about the boy's physical responses and raised her voice a bit. Naruto, can you hear me? She asked. Naruto? Naruto appeared to see Tsunade for the first time as he opened his eyes a little. Air. Naruto's fingers clutched and clawed at the sheets as his heels dug into the bed. I'm too hot to breathe. The realization caused Tsunade's brown eyes to widen. Tsunade, in full battle mode, gathered Naruto in her arms and exclaimed, Sasuke, find Shizune, Nurse Momiko, and Yamada and have them report to Emergency Room B immediately. Jiraiya, I need you now. Sasuke became confused in the empty room as the Sannin vanished in a rush of activity. A teenager with raven hair sat on a pier's edge, dipping his sandaled toes aimlessly into the water at the lake. The afternoon was heartbreakingly serene and unusually lovely. It didn't show if Uchiha Sasuke took in any of it. His stormy thoughts drifted to the fight he and Naruto had fought a few months prior, as if he were looking beyond the ripples at this feat. Damn it, you're serious about this? Yes, I am being serious. I'm going to murder you. Those blue eyes had glowed with confusion and hurt, much more obvious in hindsight. He reasoned that I was serious at the time because I felt compelled to. The only person who met the criteria was that loser. Sasuke noticed that he was kneeling on the water's surface, covering his eyes with his hands, but my body simply reacted when I thought he died. What was that sensation? What's this sensation? Now he looked at the surface of the water, seeing the ripples calm down and his reflection reform for the same reason that he didn't keep mirrors in his apartment. He typically stayed away from the water's edge. He spotted his brother in the water. Come before me when we have the same eyes. Sasuke willed himself to keep staring at his reflection as though he were punishing himself because he could feel the self-loathing growing in his chest. Naruto had stated, I don't understand why you did it, but I don't regret it. I came after you. Why? He didn't understand the irrationality of his choice until his best friend died at his hands. He didn't realize he had won until his best friend died at his hands. You're strong, Sasuke. I said there are strong people there. Just stay away from Orochimaru. You have a dream to live out. Please don't pass away. Why? Remembering Naruto hauling himself out of the water after he believed he had done it, Sasuke clutched at his dark hair with both hands. He's a jerk. I was unable to repeat it. His rambling thoughts quickly relived recent training and rehabilitation sessions, during which his boisterous teammate irritated him by chatting about anything and everything all except admit the confrontation. Sasuke only tightened his hold on his hair at the thought. Why? What had transpired that morning was beyond Sasuke's comprehension. How Naruto got caught in a genjutsu was beyond his comprehension. When it was released, he was unable to explain why the pain persisted. He was completely perplexed by Naruto's apology to him. He was unable to describe it or the reason behind his terrible and sore feelings, but one thing was for sure. There was nothing I could do. I will never be able to do anything. It's like I'm a pitiful monster. He shattered the image as his reflection glared at him, and the freezing cold stung his body for the second time. There was a heavy silence in the hallway outside the emergency room. Jiraiya was sitting on one of the benches along the wall. His arms folded. Kakashi was standing across from him, his hands buried in his pockets, his visible eye fixed on something outside the blank wall. The crimson light flickered out as the door softly clicked open and a gaunt Tsunade slipped out. Both sensei looked up expectantly without noticing the two people waiting. She leaned back to shut the door and took a short break. She concluded by stating, he's in stable condition. Tsunade's lips trembled as she attempted to smile at the two individuals who shared her concern for Naruto. Instead, she choked out a sob as her face twisted in an ugly way. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Tsunade felt a powerful arm slide around her shoulders. Just as she was ready to let herself fall to the ground, she pressed her chest against her old friend's vest and held onto it. I was so scared. Jiraiya didn't have any perverted thoughts for once. Like a million shards of broken glass, Sasuke watched the colors of the setting sun dance on the water. His clothes were dry but a little stiff, and he sat on the knoll by the pier. Everything remained somewhat numb. On the grass, he heard sandaled feet paddling softly and coming to a stop next to him. The sullen boy did not bother to raise his head. He's okay, Kakashi's voice said to him. He grunted in acknowledgement. Sasuke believed. Jiraiya told me what happened. Sasuke kept silently staring at his hands. Kakashi wondered what his sensei would say now as he looked down on his distressed pupil. The words of Obito. You know, Kakashi said, gazing out into the water, Naruto isn't the type of guy who deserts his friends. I believe the best course of action is to follow suit and simply support him. After a moment, Kakashi let out an inaudible sigh and slowly left, but Sasuke showed no signs of hearing. Konoha remained motionless. Crickets chirped their nightly song while a bright moon hung high in the night sky. Only the moonlight marked the quiet, deserted hallways of Konoha Hospital, which were both serene and unsettling. Naruto slept in his hospital room without making any noise. The door swung open with a faint creak, and a shadowy figure silently entered, leaving a long shadow on the bed and floor. There was a gentle click as the door closed. Sasuke silently observed the scene in front of him. The gentle moonlight that came through the translucent curtains made Naruto's face appear pale. An IV was attached to his arm in the corner. The monitor pulsed softly. Sasuke's dark eyes remained fixed on Naruto's prone body, observing the chest's shallow rise and fall. Sasuke's elegant eyebrows gradually knitted into a furrow, and then his jaw ached from clenching his teeth and shaking his fists by his side. I never asked for your help. Sasuke's outburst startled him. Naruto remained silent in response. Sasuke's voice sounded strained as he attempted to control it. You hear me, you moron? He asked. You think you know me? What the hell do you understand? You never had a family? As Naruto's unconscious body ignored him, Sasuke swallowed hotly. For me, why would you go to such lengths? His voice was getting louder, but he ignored it as he said, I'm not sorry for what I did. You know, I don't need you or anyone else. I have my ambition. It's all I have and all I need. Sasuke was so irritated by the IV that his eyebrows twitched a little. What could you do anyway, you fucking hypocrite? I thought you never gave up. You never stay down. Look at you. You can't even take care of yourself. Sasuke felt exhausted and empty as the hot tension that had been building inside his chest gradually subsided as he watched the moonlight play in Naruto's hair. He allowed his breathing to calm and the room to become quiet once more. His dark bangs splayed clumsily on the white sheets as he leaned heavily onto the bedside chair and rested his forehead on the edge of the mattress. His thin hand landed on top of his comrade's cool one and instinctively wrapped his fingers around it. With weary eyes, he whispered, "I don't need your help, and I definitely don't need your forgiveness." Sasuke believed he was being squeezed. In Konoha, it was a busy morning. Busy Leaf residents went about their morning errands while the outdoor vendors enthusiastically sang their wares. Sakura and Ino were enjoying their day off from training as they walked down the dirt road with a bag of groceries each. "So everything is going well training with Tsunade-sama?" "Yeah," Sakura responded. "Actually, I've been mainly working under Shizune-san's supervision. I'm still not at the level where Godem will instruct me herself exclusively." "Geez, you shouldn't complain. Miss Forehead, I mean. Godem is willing to train you, for crying out loud. I'm totally jealous." Sakura ignored the "Miss Forehead" remark and grinned proudly. Having Ino back as a friend was pleasant. Sakura laughed as Ino mimicked her teammates' movements, saying, "No, really, I think it's great that the legendary Sannin has taken a shine to your team. I mean, sure, I know I'm incredible, but I'm stuck with the #1 lazy coward and barbecue pork face." "So Choji's back to normal?" "Yeah, more or less back to his normal weight anyways. That guy sure knows how to rebound. I'd hate to say it, but he looked pretty decent while he was recovering. We're all meeting at Yakiniku Barbecue in a few days too, which won't help." Ino's blue eyes were rolling exaggeratedly. "My boys are hopeless." "Oh come on, they can't be that bad. Shikamaru is the only one of us to make Chunin after all." Ino mimicked karate chops and struck a dramatic pose while letting her grocery bag swing. "Yeah, and he couldn't even do that, right? He totally gave up, remember? He should have ended it with a super cool move or at least a dynamic pose," she said. "He's got cool moves?" Sakura remained motionless in her pose as Ino blinked at her, and then they both started laughing. After a while, Sakura noticed a familiar face walking down the street. Sakura yelled, "Kakashi-sensei," and waved. The greeting was, "Oh, good morning Sakura," Kakashi said. A grin made his mask wrinkle. "You're out early, Kakashi-sensei. Are you only late for our meetings?" Sakura sighed. "Ah, well, I had a meeting this morning and I wasn't the one who called it," he replied. Sakura noticed without realizing that Kakashi was not holding his favorite book. Sakura looked at Ino without bothering to make any inferences and turned to go. "Well, alright then, see you tomorrow, Kakashi-sensei." Sakura lingered a little while he spoke because she could feel his gaze on her. About that, wondering what he would say, Sakura paused and turned back to face him. "Seems that Naruto landed himself in the hospital during training yesterday. We won't be meeting tomorrow." Sakura gave a blink. "Is he okay?" Kakashi gazed up at the heavens. "Who knows? You know Naruto," he said in a non-committal tone before turning to leave. After observing his back for a while, Sakura and Ino asked, "Does he always seem stoned?" Ino. Tsunade sat at her desk, eyeing Jiraiya intently while trying to ignore her weariness and resting her chin on her linked fingers. "You're absolutely sure?" With his thick arms folded across his chest, Jiraiya leaned against the wall across from him and said, "I know what I saw. I consulted Kakashi too. Drew him a picture and everything. He confirmed it though," Jiraiya went on. "Though?" The hermit rubbed his wild hair with one palm out of habit and appeared confused. "Well," he said, "it's a form he's never seen before. Maybe you just can't draw." The frog hermit gave Tsunade a fist shake. "Hey, I'm being serious." Tsunade smiled wryly at her old friend. Her smile turned back to one of seriousness as she said, "Well, you can't. That's why you write, isn't it? Do we know how it was acquired?" He shook his head, saying, "No." Jiraiya put his hands on Kakashi's hips and said, "Kakashi may be a genius, but his experience isn't exactly what you call conventional. In this case, it's more complicated than simple necessity. With something this rare and powerful, it's likely a well-guarded secret." "I agree." The Hokage stood up, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "We'll figure this out. I hope we're mistaken for their benefit. I hope Naruto is doing well. It must be more of Jiraiya-sama's unusual training techniques," Sakura reasoned. Altering the colorful language. Naruto used to be critical of the Toad Hermit's instruction as she made her way to a section of the hospital she had never visited before. Naruto is such a klutz, or he just did something dumb, she persuaded herself, which helped to allay some of her own concerns. She made a concerted effort to ignore their most recent mission. Finally, she located the room. She gently rapped on the closed door, Recalling her hospital protocol, no response was found. I wonder if he has fled. Once more she turned the knob very slowly, then cracked the door open to look inside. She held back a little gulp of surprise. Even if he hadn't been identified by the Uchiha clan symbol, she would have recognized that back anywhere Sasuke was sitting stooped, with his face turned to the door and his head resting on the edge of the bed, when she discovered him before realizing that Sasuke appeared unaware of her presence. Sakura instinctively backed away and slightly closed the door. For having interrupted, she plucked up the bravery to open the door wider for a better view. Is Sasuke-kun sleeping? His face was partially hidden by his dark bangs, and his back rose and fell uniformly. Something was shimmering along the side of his nose, and Sakura could just make it out. Her gaze traced the contours of his arm. Sakura. It almost made the Kunoichi jump. With a deliberate approach, Tsunade swung the door open and stepped inside. Her green robe fluttering behind her. Sasuke awoke abruptly and hurried to confront the intruder. He turned away and wiped his face when he suddenly became aware of something. She sat where Sasuke had been a moment earlier and put a gentle hand on the blonde's forehead, saying, "Pardon me. Sasuke-kun, have come to check on Naruto." She muttered to herself, "Is there any sign of him?" Sasuke put his hands deep in his pockets and peered at them out of the corner of his eye. There was a sign. Last night. Tsunade looked at the boy out of the corner of her eye and said, "Oh? His hand. I thought it moved. You saw it then?" "No." She gazed placidly at the Uchiha, who was still lying on his arm with red marks on his face, and said, Sakura was unable to fully comprehend the exchange because it was so low, feeling somewhat useless and out of place. She shuffled her feet awkwardly and watched in confusion. Naruto then moaned and shifted beneath the sheets. Sakura hurried to the bed's opposite side. "Naruto." Tsunade muttered, "Shish." In an effort to cause her patient as little disruption as possible, with a soft exhale, she turned back to Naruto and said, "Hey." With his eyes still closed, Naruto let out a feeble breath. "He stayed with me all night." Sasuke's cheeks became hot, and he kept his back to the wall, praying that no one was watching him. Tsunade tried to entice Naruto to awaken by asking, "Who?" "My dad." Sasuke eased up. Tsunade stiffened. "In my dreams, I couldn't see his face, but he told me not to give up, because I'm not fighting alone anymore." Tsunade appeared depressed, but she forced herself to stop and went back to being a doctor. "Well, I need you to wake up now." Slowly, two lifeless blue eyes opened. Everyone held their breath without knowing. Tsunade asked, "Do you know who I am?" as she started her examination. "Granny," he said in a feeble voice. Tsunade said, "Good," relieved that his sense of reality and recognition appeared to be unharmed this time. "She will overlook the nickname. And do you know who you are?" Uzu, Maki. He was exhausted and only vaguely conscious of his surroundings for a brief moment. Everyone believed he had fallen back asleep when his eyes closed tightly. Tsunade was about to give up and try again when Naruto spoke. His breath was, "I hated that name." Tsunade's eyes had a faint sheen. "To be named after the village that hates me. To be reminded that I don't belong to any family." In an attempt to gain some validation for her bewilderment, Sakura made an effort to meet Sasuke's gaze. His gaze shifted slightly toward her. "Naruto," Tsunade started, unsure of how to proceed. Opening his eyes, Naruto said, "But I don't hate it anymore," with a feeble smile. "I have people I care about here and I'd do anything to protect them. I'd die protecting Konoha, yeah?" Tsunade's eyes were heavy with regret and sadness as she silently held Naruto's smaller hand in her warm one. Naruto made another attempt. Despite his weakness, Naruto's eyes were burning with conviction and his voice was more assertive as he said, "Did you hear me? I give my life to protect them." Tsunade was well aware of the subtext. She unstuck her tongue and gave a barely noticeable nod. "Yeah." Naruto sank back into the pillow and dozed off, seemingly appeased. For a long time, the three of them in the hospital room watched the blonde breathe in silence. The silence was finally broken by Sakura. "Excuse me, what happened to Naruto, Hokage-sama?" Tsunade collected her mind. Sakura was shocked to learn that the renowned medic Nin was at a loss, saying, "I don't know, not for certain. I need to investigate further." Tsunade continued cautiously, still observing the boy. "It's complicated." A light went on in her head as she said, "I believe something caused a reaction that was far more than usual because of a predisposition he had or has developed, or both." That was not at all helpful to Sakura or Sasuke. Sasuke thought, "She's avoiding something." Sakura tried again, her honor student attitude taking over, saying, "I'm sorry, but I still don't understand." Godem gave her apprentice a smile. "Don't worry, we'll make this a case study when you're ready for it, okay?" Sakura said, "All right," realizing that was the end of it. Sasuke wondered if she was attempting to shield him. "Fuck, just say so if you believe it's me." Sasuke. He would have jumped out of his body white as a ghost, desperately trying to stop his heart from beating out of his chest, if there had been an inner Sasuke praying she couldn't hear the crazed thumping. Sasuke calmly glanced up at the Hokage outside. You were with him before he was brought to the hospital? He gave a nod. Then you won't mind if we discuss what you know later. Of course not, said Sasuke. She attempted to interpret Sasuke's thoughts by observing his face and body language. She hoped it didn't come across that way as her eyes narrowed in distrust. All right. Expect to be summoned sometime soon. She gave them both a direct look. I'd appreciate it if you two don't mention Naruto's condition until we have more definitive answers now. Go enjoy your day off. The genin took the hint, bowed, and walked away. Tsunade's straw blonde hair was accentuated by the gentle morning light that poured into Hokage Tower, pressing her cheeks against an old manuscript. She blinked and stirred slightly. She grimaced a little at the tiny stain she had left on the ancient pages, sat up, and wiped the drool from the side of her mouth. Is it already morning? Tsunade shaded her squinting eyes as she gazed out the window and turned back to her desk, which was piled high with research books and scrolls. What if there are actually two issues here? A knock on the door was heard. Come in. Azumo and Katetsu took over. Katetsu inquired, do you have any orders today, Hokage-sama? Azumo's eyes darted swiftly away from the ink mark on the Hokage's cheek as they stood calmly. She gave him a list of names and times, saying, good morning, you two. Katetsu, have these people report to my office. Azumo, gather the instructors. After saying, right away, Hokage-sama, the Chunin left. When the door closed, Tsunade wiped at her cheek and tried to manage her unkempt hair. Oh no. There is a lot to do. I definitely took on something problematic, Grandpa. Sasuke's apartment was dark except for the harsh glints of light that filtered through the drawn blinds. As the boy stood splashing his face at the kitchen sink, it sliced him apart in glaring light and shadow. He pressed his arms up against the basin's side and closed his eyes for a long time, letting the water drip off his chin and nose. He was aware that it must have been dark beneath his eyes. Even without mirrors they were exhausted. He was exhausted before reaching to turn off the tap. He blinked out the water and gazed at it aimlessly. He stopped, dropped his hand once more, and lowered his dark head into the icy cold. Now, Sasuke, don't go drowning yourself now. Sasuke blinked at the light behind the silhouette sitting on his windowsill. As he slowly turned to face the voice, he waited for Kakashi to continue after shutting off the faucet. Never invited inside, the Junin remained in the air. Report to the Hokage's office at 10. Don't be late. When Kakashi left, the blinds swung back into place, leaving Sasuke in the dark once more. He hinnied. Noticing the irony as the water trickled from his hair and vanished down the metal drain, he watched. While happily double-fisting skewered dango, Naruto sat on the hospital bed. MMMMHMHMMMPH. Naruto gulped and swallowed. Hey. Did you bring any more, Granny Tsunade? Tsunade laughed at the blonde, relieved that he was at least partially normal again following the resealing process. He has stabilized. Kyuubi's chakra was sufficiently repressed to reveal more of Naruto's true self. No, Tsunade held back a smile as she caught a glimpse of Naruto's shoulders dropping out of the corner of her eye. But I do have this Chashubao. Really? Naruto asked, his blue eyes glimmering with appreciation and hope as he clasped his hands together. Yeah, before she started working, she gave the young boy a barbecue pork bun and took a moment to observe him happily gobble it up. Naruto, he acknowledged, his mouth still full. MMMPH. Do you remember what you experienced during the genjutsu? In the middle of chewing, Naruto paused, remembered to swallow, and smiled slightly. No, I tried, but I think I'm kinda glad I don't. Nothing at all. Naruto glanced at Tsunade, trying to find the right words. Tsunade wasn't sure which. Naruto stopped as if he realized he was about to babble or caught himself before he went somewhere he didn't want to go. Well, it's kind of like waking up from a nightmare. Your heart is pounding and you're shaking, and even though everything fades after you wake up, you still know it was the worst nightmare you've ever had. I don't know. I think there was a lot of red. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly and asked, does that make sense? Tsunade grinned and said, yeah, what about before? Do you remember what was going on just before? Cradling the half-eaten bun in his hands, Naruto examined it as he recalled the sensation of the kunai in his trembling hands. His smile faltered. Just a face full of angry Sasuke, Naruto said, grinning broadly as he looked up when Tsunade remained silent. A picture of Sasuke's angry face flashed into her mind. He said, in a low voice, I hadn't seen eyes like that since I fought him 3 months ago. Tsunade suspected he didn't realize he was saying it aloud. What do you mean? Naruto snapped out of his daydreaming state. Oh. He gave his head another rub. Naruto jerked a thumb in his own direction with a smug grin. It's nothing. It's just his eyes look different from before. He probably evolved his Sharingan while we were fighting. Probably cause I was too powerful for him to fight without extra help. He said it was not going to be easy for Tsunade to get distracted. Oh, so did he fight with those eyes the whole time 3 months back? After giving her a wide-eyed stare, Naruto crossed his arms and squinted, attempting to recall whether he had witnessed it prior to the fight ending. He was unable to. Well, I didn't notice it until, right after it was right at the end when he gave in, when I finally woke him up. After a brief period of silence, Tsunade hesitated before posing her subsequent query. Naruto, do you think he meant to hurt you? Back then? Hey. Tsunade almost leapt. All of a sudden, Naruto became vigilant and accused the Sannin. You already passed judgment on Sasuke. You can't take it back. Tsunade rubbed her brow, which was beginning to hurt, and said, calm down, geez, I'm not out to punish Sasuke. Well, good, Naruto said haltingly. He gave her a suspicious look and said, cause I know you don't like him. You haven't answered the question. Naruto sank back into the pillows in resignation. He was in a bad place when we fought, but yeah, I think he seriously wanted to kill me. If it wasn't for Kyuubi, I think I'd have. He was suddenly tired. The ensuing silence was awkward. And still, sometimes it feels like I, died or something, that day. He pounded his chest and said, huh, but that's a stupid, isn't it? I'm right here. Firm. Gimme 3 days, Grands, I'll be right as rain and you'll be fighting to keep your job from me. Idiot. Later that morning, Tsunade was back at her desk, occupied with paperwork while she eagerly awaited guests. A clever rap at the door caught her attention. Come in. She felt Uchiha Sasuke stand in front of her desk as she heard the door open. She placed her brush carefully on the ink pad and began. I'll be frank, without looking up or saying anything beforehand. She clasped her fingers together and looked directly into her eyes. Jiraiya saw you pin Naruto with the Mangekyo Sharingan activated. An almost inaudible noise escaped from the back of Sasuke's throat, and she saw his eyes widen slightly before the reaction subsided into a controlled expression of indifference. What do you have to say to that? Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the Hokage as though she were the object of scrutiny during the pregnant silence. That it's impossible. And why is that? Because I don't have the Mangekyo Sharingan. For a moment, Tsunade questioned whether the brat was deliberately trying to test her patience, and on what basis can you contradict both Jiraiya and Kakashi? The mention of both of his sensei caused a brief flicker behind Sasuke's dark eyes. It was the sole sign of a response. As I said, it's impossible. You'll need to elaborate if I'm to believe you. My word should be enough. Tsunade was becoming irritable. Need I remind you that of the two of us, you're the one who abandoned Konoha? She replied sternly. She wasn't going to tell Sasuke that she had been fleeing before being appointed Hokage, but he didn't know either. So pardon me for not taking your word on faith. Sasuke stood silently staring at the woman in front of him once more as he struggled with himself. Last but not least, he said, because there is a requirement for the Mangekyo Sharingan that I couldn't fulfill. Tsunade waited for him to go on, her poker face equally as skillful. They challenged each other, without saying a word, to break the silence first. Ultimately, Sasuke was aware that he would stay until she received her response. Your closest friend, you have to kill him, and Naruto, as you see, is not dead. Therefore, it's impossible for me to have the Mangekyo Sharingan. Tsunade was the next to be taken aback. 3 months ago, at the border, was that your intent? To obtain the Mangekyo Sharingan? Intent is irrelevant. The fact is that I did not obtain it, Sasuke calmly and accurately responded. Will that be all, Hokage-sama? Tsunade studied the bold brat in front of her. That'll be all. You're dismissed for now. Slightly bowing, Sasuke turned and walked away. From the Hyuga courtyard came the dull sound of fluttering cloth and connecting limbs. All right, good. Arms extended, Hyuga Neji skidded to a stop, panting. His Byakugan activated, he turned to face his uncle. More. I have to move forward until I can see it. Hiyashi gave his nephew serious thought. He had seen him go through rehabilitation by himself, without saying a word. Hiyashi had paid little attention to or shown much interest in his brother's child until the Chunin exams, with the exception of a passing acknowledgement of Neji's strong inherited family line. He didn't realize Neji was isolating himself from other Hyuga until the past few months. Neji appeared adamant about staying an orphan despite being surrounded by family. Hiyashi was therefore understandably taken aback when his nephew asked him to supervise his training. Despite their tense relationship, Hiyashi recognized that Neji's approach was significant, and he couldn't bring himself to turn him down, although it was unusual for the clan's leader to train a branch family member. Hiyashi made an exception for his own comfort because Neji didn't request to learn any specific skills. Maybe it would help him pay Neji back for keeping the truth about his father hidden for so long. Maybe, just a little, he could heal his shattered family. The young prodigy caught his breath, and he watched he makes deliberate movements. From the corner of his observant, pale eyes, he saw his oldest daughter stumble a little as she rushed in carrying a tea tray. He let out a mental sigh. "Let's take a break, Neji." As Hinata poured the tea, they took their seats on the compound's raised walkway. Neji could see Hinata's awareness of his uncle's disappointment in his face. He tried to divert his cousin's attention by turning to face her. "Hinata-sama." Still cautious from their encounter in the preliminary stages, she jerked her head to glance at her older cousin with a twinge of remorse. Neji lifted his mouth to what he hoped was a benign smile. "I heard that Naruto is in the hospital. Shouldn't you go visit?" Hiyashi looked over, a little irritated that his nephew had unintentionally addressed his daughter in a commanding manner the kids didn't notice. Rather, Neji observed as Hinata silently blushed and lowered her head and eyes softly. "It's okay," she answered. From the other side of the courtyard came a loud voice that said, "What, didn't you know?" Kiba and Shino went up to the Hyuga and said, "She already went to see him out of concern." But when she saw him with an IV in his arm, she nearly fainted. She was so embarrassed that she didn't dare show her face. Kiba-kun," hinted Hinata weakly. Kiba's roaring laughter at Hinata's expense drowned her out involuntarily. Neji's lips lifted even more. "Hiyashi-sama, Neji-san," Shino said courteously to the current group, ignoring his teammate who was laughing and embracing his stomach. With a, "Don't worry, Hinata-sama," Neji said. "Naruto-kun is directly under the Hokage's care. The Hokage." Hinata cut straight through. "Father, I received a message that Hokage-sama wanted to see you. That's why I was late with tea." Hiyashi nodded and got to his feet, suppressing another sigh. Training is over for today. When the owner of Sasuke's apartment slammed the door behind him, the room suddenly became bright again. Sasuke walked to the kitchen, yanked a toaster violently off the wall, and sat down at the kitchen table after a quick breath and a beat. As Sasuke tilted the metal toaster, he saw 3 tomo in each of his eyes turn red against the chrome surface. Having grown up since Jiraiya almost killed him during one of their sessions, calling on the Sharingan was now instinctive, but the boy scowled in dismay. "Perhaps my emotional state needs to be elevated," he imagined Itachi snatching his wrist and throwing him away. "I don't care about you anymore." His eyes didn't change, but he felt ashamed and angry at himself. The memory nearly distracted him, so he called himself to attention and changed strategy. He thought back to the incident where his foolish teammate was pointing the kunai at himself in desperation. A new kind of rage and indignation erupted. Eyes that are dilated, blue, scared, and hurt. Shame. His eyes remained the same, but his reflection, distorted and ugly, mocked and taunted him. He firmly clamped his lids. Imagine his parents lying at his feet in a bloody puddle. "Just to see how much I can do." Red anguish and rage bubbled and burst. Why is there hatred, fear, resentment, powerlessness, and betrayal? His brother's icy face, which resembled his own quite a bit. Sasuke's eyes widened despite their frantic spinning. The Tomo's eyes remained the same. The toaster was violently pushed away after slamming into the tabletop. "How come they're messing with my head?" Sasuke pondered the Sannin ferociously. Orochimaru at least appeared to have been open and honest about his interactions with his subordinates. Bitterly, he questioned if it had been a mistake not to visit Orochimaru. Regardless of motivation, he would have at least been working with someone who was interested in training him by now. He most likely would have been stronger and free of pointless distractions like wondering why Naruto was in the hospital. "I no longer even desire them. Furthermore, there simply isn't a way." Nevertheless, he carefully picked up the toaster and gave it another go. In the meantime, the sound of a menacing voice caused Hokage Tower to tremble. "Whaat?" Hiyashi stood calmly in front of a very irate Tsunade, and Shizune winced in his place. "Again, with all due respect Hokage-sama, I decline." "Have another come then." Such skills discussed would only be passed to main house members, and in Konoha's critical state, it would be a misallocation of resources. "You mean you won't risk any clan members working with Naruto?" "With the Kyuubi vessel," Hiyashi corrected her sarcastically. "With Naruto. The only reason you would require our assistance is if your suspicions prove true. We just discussed that. In that situation, the boy is less." Tsunade raged. "You're twisting my words." Satisfied that the Hokage had recognized that she had backed herself into a corner, Hiyashi did not argue with her to appear less antagonistic. He purposefully lowered his crossed arms to his sides. He communicated his serious resolve by making eye contact with practiced ease. You must understand, Hokage-sama, it is my duty as the clan leader to protect the family first and foremost, and though taboo, the lingering feelings towards the Kyuubi's attack are still felt, it would be unbecoming of the head to help the boy and inappropriate to order a main house member to do likewise as the Hokage. You must understand the need to set an example. Yeah, I understand politics, yes, Hiyashi replied plainly, and even if I do agree to help, I physically cannot deliver. Hyugan eyes deteriorate just like any others with age, even recognized as the strongest of my clan. My eyes are no longer as supple. It is nigh impossible for me to modify my dujutsu to confirm your theory. Tsunade rubbed at the mild ache that was starting to form close to her temple while closing her eyes. So, what you're saying is, I need a non-main house Hyuga who will work with Naruto willingly, who is talented enough to figure out an unprecedented dujutsu without explicit instruction to save main house face, but who is young enough such that his eyes are physically capable of mastering such a dujutsu. The throbbing in her head was growing increasingly severe. Exhausted, she opened her eyes to see Hiyashi's expressionless face. Tell me, Hiyashi, does such a person exist? Neji wrinkled his nose, blinked hard, and made a tiny sound in his throat. Lee was able to kick him in the chest because it was just enough of a distraction. Neji skidded to a graceful landing after flipping in midair once more. An amusing pressure accumulated. Ah, she. With a gleam in her eye, Tenten teased, oh? Neji's got a cold? Neji rubbed his knuckles against his nose. I don't get colds. Then someone must have been thinking of me just now, Lee replied. I got a good solid strike on Neji-kun after all. Tenten snapped, that's not how it works, dummy, back. As Neji urged them to concentrate, Lee simply smiled and playfully sidestepped Tenten's feeble attempts to knock him over his head. When the messenger hawk's cry reached Guy, he was watching his cute team teasing each other. With a smile of amusement, he narrowed his eyes to the sun. Is it already that time? With his face buried in his book, Kakashi wandered into the meeting room 40 minutes later. The silver-haired shinobi looked up to see his bowl-cut, self-proclaimed rival wearing a serious expression. Oh, Kakashi. It's unseemly to be late for the Hokage's meeting. A few of the younger and lower-ranked shinobi in the room were in awe of Guy. He's quite something to be able to stand up to the copy nin Kakashi like that, they spoke in hushed tones. After looking around the room, Kakashi casually put the small orange book in his equipment pouch. The Hokage's not here herself, it seems like I'm actually early. Abruptly, Kakashi discovered Guy hunched over, his fists shaking, and his face displaying a constipated expression. Kakashi didn't even bother rolling his eyes because he was all too familiar with Guy's repertoire of poses. Guy pointed at the unconcerned Kakashi and yelled, that's it. Kakashi, your behavior is too unsightly to merit your position as my eternal rival. Kakashi could almost see the burning flames of youth raging in the Junin's eyes. I declare my new self-rule. I promise that I'll have you on time for the next 10, no, 20 Junin meetings if I can't do it, Guy said with a confident smile. I will wake up and crow at sunrise on top of Hokage Tower for a month. The shinobi who had admired him moments earlier perspired as his spotless teeth pricked out. Punctuality is an important skill that needs to be trained too. Whatever, Guy. The door swung open before Guy could make any overly dramatic remarks about how modern his rival's response was. Leaning her weight against the front desk, the Hokage swept through the room. The room was quiet except for a few whispers. You are called here today because I've received confirmation for the next Chunin exam. We had 87 representatives as the last hosting village, but as you are all aware, our forces have dwindled since the Oto-Suna invasion, so we cannot afford or risk having our genin forces and their accompanying Junin instructors participate on foreign soil. As a result, the next biennial exam has been postponed due to recent political unrest. Mummers again. However, haven't we all been putting in extra effort to avoid coming across as weak, Hokage-sama? You said yourself that in light of political instability, we must maintain our position of military dominance if we are to even hope for peace. Kurenai inquired about everyone's thoughts. Asuma agreed with a grunt. We will send no more than 5 teams of 3 instead of strength in numbers, Tsunade said, pushing herself off the desk and standing up. Ah, I've already thought of that. They will be our best, though ideally, someone who has previously taken the test and is aware of the risks and expectations. We might run our own preliminary qualification test, depending on the number of nominations. Tsunade pulled the teachers, and nearly all of them had distracted eyes as they evaluated their own pupils in their minds. Not just any newbie who is nominated will participate this time. Have nominations in by the end of next week, Tsunade reminded everyone. adding that preliminary proceedings should be completed in 2 months if more than 15 people were nominated officially. The Chunin exams will take place in 3 days. Sama Hokage. Where will the exam be held? A Junin in the rear said. Tsunade responded after a pause, saying, Iwagakure no Sato. Kakashi pressed his back against the wall and stuffed his hands deep into his pockets as the room hummed with the news. Is it the village buried in the stone? Kakashi's hands trembled, hidden behind his familiar mask of indifference. Duty, honor, order, adages and words of wisdom painted on the canvas as whispers from a noble time forgotten. The brushstrokes danced. But Hiyashi wasn't looking outside the paper doors of the Hyuga compound. The crickets sang their evening song, and the silhouette of a man could be seen. Hiyashi was facing an old scroll mounted on the wall of his den, his natural frown more pronounced than usual. Unwilling to look at his guest, Hiyashi heard a rap on the wooden panel and the scraping of the door sliding open, and he knew without turning that Neji was waiting to be acknowledged. You will meet with the Hokage tomorrow, 11 sharp, Hiyashi said solemnly, turning to face his nephew. Neji's lips pulled downward, and he raised his eyebrows a little at the impolite gesture, but he waited quietly for his uncle to pass. You will be notified by Hokage-sama about the specifics of her request. You can accept or reject as you see fit, Neji said, tilting his head slightly in a quizzical manner. Dismissed, early were Sakura and Sasuke. They were caught off guard and blinked foolishly at one another before awkwardly acknowledging each other after almost running into each other on the bridge. Good morning, Sasuke-kun, mornin'. They went back to where they usually were and leaned against the railings, Sakura gazing out into the water and Sasuke avoiding it from the opposite direction. To their delinquent sensei, being on time means being early or ridiculously early, depending on Kakashi's mood, so nobody ever arrived earlier than on time. Today, however, both sought solitude in the fresh morning air to reflect on their incapacitated teammate. In the end, Team 7's teamwork had become surprisingly strong since the incident. However, it had also become oddly professional for their own reasons. No one wanted to get personal. One treads carefully among sleeping demons and broken glass. Sakura felt a strong urge to fall into habit to break the awkward silence, but somehow fawning over Sasuke seemed disrespectful today. Even without Naruto instead, she mentally recited Tenketsu names. Sasuke scowled, a little annoyed at the intrusion, and resorted to visualizing taijutsu sequences. Dude, have any of you noticed that last move? When we whoop her and the triplets, Hana won't know what hit her, right, Akamaru? Sakura turned to see Team 8 coming up, Kiba talking excitedly to the others while Hinata smiled warmly and Shino listened intently. Akamaru barked in agreement as she walked playfully around the group, and Sakura's sad eyes briefly turned green before she forced the emotion away and stood up to greet them. Good morning, Hinata-chan, Kiba-kun, and Shino-kun. Why are all of you up so early? As though he had just noticed the kunoichi, Kiba turned and blinked. Early? It's almost 11, Kiba said, giving her a slightly perplexed look. Well, I guess it's early for us, Sakura said, a little taken aback. How is Naruto-kun doing? Hinata's cheeks were slightly flushed as she asked. Oh, is Naruto still not out? Before Sakura could respond, Kiba interrupted, smiling mischievously. So he hasn't heard the news. Probably he's the last to know, so I'm willing to wager he'd flip. News? Pale eyes glanced inconspicuously at the wall clock as sandaled feet tapped on the wood-paneled floor of Hokage Tower. 10:52. Hyuga Neji detested being unprepared, so he was not overly early, nor was he obnoxious about being on time, but early enough to allow him to move at a leisurely pace and orient himself. As he thought back on the meeting the previous evening, Neji resisted the urge to put his hands in his pockets and walked deliberately past the Chunin runners. Hiyashi-sama mentioned something that the Hyuga does not support. What could it be? He paused in front of the mahogany double doors and made his way to knock, paused, and then rapped on the door in a clever manner. Come in, a recognizable voice yelled as he walked in. Ehhhhhh. Neji grimaced. What's he doing here, Granny? Naruto asked the woman behind the desk, his eyes wide as he stood by the Hokage's desk and pointed dramatically at Neji. Neji said, Hokage-sama, and Naruto-kun. Tsunade didn't notice the Hyuga because she was too preoccupied with the loud blonde. He's here too. Oh no. You didn't tell me it was going to be Neji. Naruto interrupted, shaking his head emphatically and crossing his arms in a X. I am not working with this guy. Naruto said, pointing once more at Neji. As Naruto persisted in protesting, Neji focused on the fingernails digging into his palms. Naruto. Naruto jumped as the Hokage slammed her hand down, causing her desk to tremble dangerously beneath her palm. You have no idea what's going on, he said before you protest, at least try to understand what's happening. Tsunade's breathing punctuated the heavy silence that followed. Naruto's torso slumped and he jammed his hands into his pockets. What else do I need to know? Naruto made eye contact with Neji for a moment before lowering his gaze to his twiddling toes. Ask someone else or forget it, he said, his bottom lip protruding in a pout. He's going to use that crazy eye thing on me. This is not your decision, brat. For the first time since he had entered, Tsunade and Naruto turned to face Neji and said, Hokage-sama. I am here to accept the task you have for me, they said, but I can see why Naruto-kun would be reluctant to collaborate with me. I can ask Hiyashi-sama to send for someone in my place if you promise. For a moment, there was silence, and Naruto was clearly surprised. This is a very personal matter. Maybe I should have given his feelings a little more thought, but how was I to know Hiyashi would send someone the brat knew? Tsunade sighed silently as she watched Naruto, his eyes glistening with something like fear. Neji. That's right. He was recruited on the retrieval mission. Did something happen between these two? Before the blonde could protest once more, Tsunade swiftly got to work, keeping her eyes on Neji. Have you been briefed on the situation? I was told I would be briefed here, Hokage-sama. I see, that man is doing a good job of protecting himself. If that's the case, Hyuga Neji, I can still give you the option to accept or reject my proposal, but before you know all the specifics of the situation, I need your decision for security reasons. Tsunade got up from her seat and said, here's what I can tell you. We require information that your special skills are best suited to gather. You will have access to extremely sensitive information for this assignment that is classified by the Third's decree. If you agree, you will play a key role in creating the village's long-term security measures. A Konohanin's well-being is directly impacted by the current circumstance. If you accept this task, you are not allowed to share any information about it with your peers or family, particularly peers and family. Tsunade took a moment to process the information. At this time, the time commitment is uncertain. Although I reserve the right to excuse you from regular mission assignments, you are expected to continue with your regular daily activities in addition to this task. Since this is off the books, you are not obligated to take part. Nevertheless, you were selected as the top applicant for the position, and if you accept, I anticipate your complete dedication. Kindly give the conditions some thought and let me know what you decide by the end of the day. Tsunade paused once more. If you accept these terms, details will be provided. Do you have any questions? The question lingered in the air while she waited. No, then you're dismissed. After waiting for the door behind the Hyuga to click shut, Tsunade leapt. Naruto, I don't care what's between you two, but if you want to get better, you really can't afford Neji to say no. I have nothing wrong. Despite knowing it was a lie, Naruto instinctively threw back. They exchanged eye challenges, but the silence that followed allowed Naruto to relax a bit, and after losing, he put his hands back in his pockets and faced the ground. Naruto murmured, I just really rather he not know about me. The Sanin's face softened a little, and she flopped back in her chair, changing from Hokage to older sister. Anyway, you were acting very inappropriately in front of Neji-kun. Surely you understand what it's like to feel unwelcome, she said, glaring at Naruto. Show some restraint and we could have discussed it afterwards. Naruto was a little surprised. What? Tsunade's eyes seemed to stare right into Naruto's head as he sputtered, I didn't mean, I wasn't. Naruto mentally chastised himself and fled out the door without saying goodbye. Idly leaning against the side railing of the bridge, half listening to the conversation, Sasuke felt a small creature approaching and looked down to see Kiba's dog, Akamaru, or something, sniffing at his feet, then growling and yipping briefly. Gods, Sasuke detested yippy dogs. They were vicious, and he wanted to kick it. Hey! An angry Inuzuka greeted Sasuke when he jerked his head up, saying, don't touch Akamaru. Kiba-kun. Hinata tugged at her teammate's sleeve in desperation. Do you have an issue with me? Sasuke came back, practically inviting a fight. Yeah, I do. Please, Kiba-kun. Though he didn't move to attack, Kiba gave Hinata a frustrated growl and jerked his arm away. Just stay the hell away from my dog. Sasuke pushed his fists into his pockets, turned his back on the group, and left after narrowing his eyes dangerously at Kiba without inciting the erratic Inuzuka. As her team departed, Hinata hung back for a moment. Kiba snorted. Let's get going, guys. Sakura-chan, I'm sorry about Kiba. No, it's alright, I get it. Sakura glanced at Sasuke, who was running away, and hoped he didn't hear them. The weight on his chest increased as he did. After leaving the building and walking halfway across the courtyard, Neji sensed Naruto was following him. The Hyuga stopped but did not turn around, And Naruto also stopped but did not yell. They stood in silence for a while, the genius waiting while the dropout regained his bearings, before Naruto suddenly broke the awkward silence with a wry smile. "I can ask someone else to take my place," Naruto sang in jest, misquoting the Hyuga. "What the hell was that? Neji, what do you fear? What?" Analyzing the forced confrontational tone, Neji turned to face Naruto. As Neji refused to fall for the ruse, Naruto felt his ruse crumble. "Whatever this task is, it has to do with you personally." Neji stood thinking. Naruto's anger after he sneered at his cousin during the preliminary round, the blonde's outrage when Neji made fun of him during the third Chunin exam, his own spectacular disappointment after Kidomaru tore him to pieces in the forest. "You've never had any reason to believe in me, much less consider me a friend. If you don't want me to work with you, that's okay." After blinking at Neji, Naruto smiled to contain his laughter and said, "You fool, it's the other way around, because I do, even though I didn't want to, and they call you an insightful genius? You must be getting out of touch, Neji." Neji knitted his brows together and scowled a little. The vein in Neji's forehead itched as Naruto smiled earnestly and said, "Look, starting over after realizing the communication breakdown, even though you were a total prick when we first met, you're all right. So how about you take the job and prove that you're trustworthy?" As Neji's unsettlingly pale eyes silently studied him, Naruto became a little uneasy. And if you succeed, you'll be acknowledged as a true genius. What did Wadaya say?" Neji considered answering, but changed his mind and chose to say, "The Hokage's conditions were clear that no one is to know." As Naruto sighed, "Well, I'll know, that should be enough." "Not really, hey." It was Naruto's moment to become enraged. "Will you accept or not?" Neji grinned. "I accept." Neji was too preoccupied trying to accept that Naruto had a beast inside of him, the Kyuubi no Yuko, to notice that he was digging his fingers into his thighs. It was the stuff of nightmares and legends. He took a deep swallow as he untucked his tongue from the roof of his mouth. It felt heavy and thick. "Okay. Okay then." Godem Hokage gave you a sympathetic smile and said, "I'm sorry to burden you with this knowledge, but it is essential to your mission." She didn't know much about the boy, but if he was a Hyuga, he would be aware of his family history. The clan suffered significant losses while fighting the Kyuubi, and Hiyashi made the family's lingering resentment evident. Tsunade purposefully briefed Naruto separately at Naruto's request because she wasn't sure how Neji would respond. "So far, so good." Tsunade held her breath as Neji spoke distractedly. "Then, I take it that the Kyuubi is a threat to the village." His eyes were slightly glassy, and he was thinking about the rescue mission while focusing on the dull ache of his still healing wounds. "I'm honored and prepared to do my duty to protect a Leaf comrade in the village," Neji said, and this was the Kyuubi after all. "There are those more qualified to handle a situation of this magnitude," he acknowledged. Humbleness never sat well with the Hyuga prodigy, but the past year has taught him otherwise. "I won't deny that the Kyuubi is a threat, but the threat exists due to what I believe is a side effect to something else entirely," Tsunade said, acknowledging with a slight nod, but her jaw remained firmly set. "Before we can take action, we must comprehend the underlying cause of the issue. Your help is crucial in this situation." Neji's forehead furrowed in perplexity and expectation. Tsunade let out a slow breath. "Neji-kun. The fight, prolonged recuperation, reverted chakra control, unusual conduct, moods, and mistakes. What transpired during the mission, training field, etc. All of the symptoms, everything. I believe Naruto's lost part of his soul." Chi. Naruto sneezed hard and banged his head against the wall on the upswing. "Ow. Oh no. Too much energy, not worth it." When alone, he sat in the deserted hallway just outside the Hokage's door, letting the pain throb with his pulse instead of rubbing his skull. "Damn it," he repeated in a whisper of frustration. "This is really, truly awful." From beyond the door came a muffled shout. As his fingers involuntarily moved in circles across his stomach, he wondered hazily if he had just lost an ally. Neji almost suffocated. "What? I believe that Naruto died in." "Wah." When Tsunade firmly said, "Neji, let me finish," Neji gritted his teeth in an attempt to recover from his rare moment of losing his cool as all of the Hokage's crazy ideas and their ramifications raced through his mind. "Pay attention. I think that when the Kyuubi's self-preserving abilities took over and prevented Naruto from dying, his soul was already departing his body. However, I have a suspicion that something changed in his soul, that the bond is weaker, not present, or something. Here's where you can help." Tsunade turned to face the boy, who was only 14 years old despite his reputation as a genius. Naruto's defenses against the Kyuubi are unstable due to his weak soul and, consequently, his weak chakra. I don't need to tell you how dangerous this is for everyone. But Kyuubi appears to be using times of emotional, mental, and physical weakness to manifest itself. My sources also suggest that Kyuubi occasionally seeps into Naruto's mind, though we don't know how much. Tsunade paused, unsure of whether to go on, and leaned forward, her voice becoming softer. Neji-kun, Naruto is in pain. I want to help him in any way we can. Your mission, Hyuga Neji, is to confirm or refute my theory, and if confirmed, to find a way to manage Naruto's symptoms and any complications, she said, concealing a pout as she realized she couldn't read the Hyuga and felt a little hot in her cheeks. Quickly find a way, Neji. The boy appeared preoccupied for a while, and Tsunade questioned whether he had even heard her theory and his mission. You boys faced very strong opponents, she said, avoiding the questions of when and who. At last, Neji made eye contact, and Tsunade repeated, her voice deadly serious, ASAP, Neji-kun. Hyuga Neji got up from his chair, his eyes full of renewed resolve. Understood, Tsunade grimaced as she watched the young genin close the door behind him. Have you guys got that? Jiraiya, standing just outside the window, grunted. Yeah, Kakashi, now sitting on the window sill, replied. Tenzo, keep an eye on them, Tsunade yelled again without looking back. In a flash, an Anbu on the overhang vanished. Sakura shuffled her feet impatiently across the village in growing annoyance of her tardy sensei. Sensei has no sense of responsibility. Inner Sakura raged. On any other day, Sakura would have welcomed her time alone with Sasuke, who was once again leaning aloofly on the bridge with his arms draped over the railings. However, after their encounter with Team 8, she had been met with short answers in her feeble attempt at conversation, so she would have been grateful for a diversion. They waited in uncomfortable silence. Yo. You're running late. Sakura walked back hotly without turning to face Kakashi, who she knew was sitting on the bridge's overhang. Kakashi straightened up and fell to the ground, with one hand scratching his neck and a jovial smile on his face. Well, now I was on my way when I fell into an alternate reality and met a demon tamer. Kakashi shrugged, feeling the colder than normal glares of his irate students. What is this news that we have been hearing about, Kakashi? Sakura was taken aback when Sasuke spoke first, particularly when he mentioned Kiba. News? Kakashi drew lead more slowly than normal. Want to go into further detail? The dog boy, was Sasuke's curt response. Sakura forced a trembling laugh and said, he means Inuzuka Kiba-kun. As though looking up at his thoughts, Kakashi inclined his head toward the sky and said, news, Kakashi's eye rolled mischievously to look at his students. Oh. You must be referring to the Chunin examinations. Sakura came back with wide eyes, and Sasuke tensed at the news, too, according to Kakashi. What? Sakura interrupted when her sensei suddenly produced 2 scrolls and thrust them into her face. Here, in order to view the scrolls without squinting, Sakura stumbled backwards. What is it? Your next mission. Kakashi tossed one to Sasuke and dropped the other into her hands. With his hands around his hips and his eyes positively beaming, Kakashi knelt down to the genin's level and said, if you even want me to nominate you for the exams this time, you'll need more field experience, right? He performed a song. To what extent do you understand the soul? Neji was quiet except for the involuntary twitch of one of his fingers, which Tsunade took as a signal to go on. Because we are able to sense and work with chakra, we have a great deal of knowledge about it. The Hyuga can even see the flow of chakra energy. On the other hand, we only know that a person stops living when their soul leaves their body. That's about all we know about the soul. Consider chakra as potential energy that can be transformed into physical energy and used to bring about the elements more akin to spiritual energy. The soul contains our spirit, life, and the spark that gives us life. A person who experiences soul weakness turns into a shell of the person they were before. So far, do you understand? Yes. As though she had had to deal with someone who hadn't, Tsunade appeared relieved and said, good. Little is known about the nature of the soul because we can't feel and identify it like chakra. Nevertheless, the changeover hung solemnly. There is a theory that the soul and our chakra system are inseparable, that they flow and circulate in a similar way, and that they may even cross at specific points. Neji speculated that Tsunade was revisiting a painful memory when she said, by extension, we theorize that the soul pathways also have gates and tenketsu equivalents. Do you see where I'm going with this, Neji-kun? The fact that there are forbidden chakra-based jutsu affecting the soul corroborate this theory. Neji took her time. You think it's possible that the Hyuga, who are capable of seeing and manipulating chakra within a person, might also find a way to manipulate another person's soul? Tsunade grinned and said, you got it actually, Your clan has already conducted research in the past, with encouraging findings. Mon. Naruto's complaining broke Neji's train of thought. They freaking went on a mission without me. Is it not unbelievable? And they wouldn't have even told me if I didn't run into Sakura-chan, he swore at his careless teammates. At the moment, Neji was sitting on a picnic table with scrolls and parchments spread out in front of him, drawing on rice paper superimposed on a model of the chakra circulatory system, while Naruto was sitting on top of a training post, throwing pebbles at a tree trunk. You are aware of what she said? According to her, Kakashi-sensei told her that I wasn't well and that the old hag had told her not to go on missions. He really painted me as being completely weak. Hey, are you even paying attention to me? Naruto jumped off the post. Neji. Neji set down his pen and gazed at the red-faced blonde with indifference. And what is false in that statement? That isn't the purpose. At least they could have invited me to go. You'd have probably said yes. Oh, Naruto closed his eyes and rubbed at his hair vigorously in exasperation. Forget it, just let's get this going. With a web of unsightly veins running down his face, Naruto opened his blue eyes to see Neji's piercing gray ones boring through him. Oh no. With his arms flapping wildly and his legs jerking up and down, Naruto was dancing around the green like a broken marionette on day 2 thanks to Neji. Are you certain that this is required? Yes. Theoretically, the pathways containing the soul would be easier to detect when the body was moving, and chakra flowed more quickly and was therefore more visible. Neji smirked and added another mark to his diagram, suggesting that he might assign jumping jacks to Naruto tomorrow. A few days later, Naruto had to avoid the Juken. Again and again and again, bruise beneath the clavicle, bruise on the forearm. Doom. Enough already. Naruto attempted to kick Neji in the middle. Bracing himself for the slight vertigo that came with switching between sight, which had become more apparent lately, Neji sidestepped the blow and let go of the Byakugan. You are aware that I must experiment with various hand sign and pressure point combinations. It is inevitable you're slowing down the process by fighting it. Neji's composed voice was strained from weariness and annoyance. Indeed, I'm sick of serving as your test subject or something. You are the genius. Just figure it out. Neji frowned as a nerve twitched. Don't assume that people who are struggling are just like you and Lee. Are you aware of how incredibly difficult this is? Naruto turned his eyes to a patch of grass and rubbed the back of his neck guiltily, blinked, and felt a pressure build up in his chest from hearing Neji's angry outburst. Well, would you mind being a bit kinder then? A pause occurred when Naruto finally had the courage to look up. He saw that Neji appeared somewhat guilty himself. According to his senpai, yeah, sure, Neji gave Naruto a wry smile in return. And it's guinea pig, loser. Setting down the pen once more, Neji squeezed the bridge of his nose a little and pressed his fingers against his eyelids, calling himself to focus on the systems in his mind's eye instead of the pain, trying to piece together all he knew. While Kyuubi's chakra, now that he knew what he saw at the Chunin exams, licked fiery red-orange, Naruto's was simultaneously both, and neither to his Byakugan, normal chakra was a flowing stream of electric white-blue. Neji suspected that Kyuubi's chakra was hidden by the seal, but it was concentrated in the abdominal area, showing along the edges of the central coil like the fiery ring of an eclipse. Naruto's chakra dominated, the fire occasionally peaking above the surface before vanishing again and creeping almost imperceptibly along the edges. Occasionally the two streams ran parallel, red, gray, brown, milk, blue, orange, all dirty. Neji was secretly relieved and more than a little impressed that Naruto's natural strength could contain the Kyuubi for so long, but he found Naruto's chakra thin and stretched. Diluted, at least the two chakras seemed somewhat incompatible, not exactly oil and water, but enough. Naruto claimed he could only tap into Kyuubi's chakra after he'd used up his own. Slowly, Neji opened his eyes to study the diagram under his arm. Naruto's soul pathway was infinitely fainter, ghost-like. It pulsed in and out of sight. But it did map closely with the chakra system as Tsunade had suggested, feeding into the chakra pathway at several key points, most noticeably at the gates. It seemed as if the soul kept the health of tenketsu points and chakra system. Like a stream of water in a hose, it keeps the tenketsu from collapsing in on itself from the surrounding pressure, giving substance to the chakra and strengthening its flow. There was vexingly little movement in Naruto's system though. The soul stream was barely trickling into the hungry chakra. Neji wished he could attribute its faintness to untrained eyes, but he knew better. He mentally shook his head regardless. The best defense was to keep the points clear, both in the chakra and soul systems, and to keep the flow as strong as possible and, theoretically, Kyuubi's chakra can be contained and redirected by strategically opening and closing points as well, like acupuncture. Life Gate, points 4, 13, 22, 7. He recited Limit Gate, points 10, 12, 15, and 3. Neji's mind wandered. Kyuubi, his lips pressed back against his teeth as he grimaced and clutched the fabric of his pants. God damn it, this is all theory. The heel of his hands pressed against his eyelids until he saw sparks. The third Chunin exam was in his memory, and Neji felt his breath catch in his chest as if he was there again. The chakra was hot, suffocating, and oppressive. It gripped and shook the very core of his being. Nevertheless, he had continued, driven by his outrage and frustration at the boy who disregarded reason and conviction. Could he have faced it at that time if he had known? Could he face it now? How many parts monster, how many parts human? Neji knew something about anger. He had directed it at fate, at family, at stupid ignorant adults, and at stupid ignorant children, but this feeling was different, being angry at himself suddenly. The unidentifiable pressure that had been gnawing at his brain and squeezing at his chest since Tsunade had briefed him flared up unmistakably as guilt. You'll never know what it's like to carry a seal that you'll never be able to remove. Yes, I can? I was such a fool, how can I? He had been angry that this stranger had the audacity to call out his own pain and sin and lay it out so clearly. He had been angry that that untalented brat could dismiss his personal troubles so casually. Neji adjusted to the light and saw Naruto holding out a glass of ice water as something wet and cold tapped against his arm. He gave the excuse that they were out of juice, but his gaze was not really on Neji. I prefer tea anyway. Neji took the cool glass and pressed it to his eyes and forehead. With his arm resting on the tabletop behind him, the blonde collapsed backwards on the bench and watched with a hint of worry written on his forehead. I can't believe you're trying to study this from scratch. No answer. Hey. Granny mentioned that the Hyuga had already conducted some research to assist you. Why don't you investigate that? Branch members are restricted. Naruto squinted and racked his brain, then had an epiphany and slammed a fist into an open palm. I understand. How about asking Hinata? She might discover something and inform us. I wager she's the kind to do that kind of thing. Naruto grinned, seemingly in reference to an inside joke. I can't? Impatiently, Naruto retorted. Why the hell not? Are you two still unable to communicate? Clink in Neji's glass, the ice solidified. Neji's face was a controlled calm even as a nagging voice inside told him that it was true. Another voice objected. He had been trying to see past his gray-tinted lenses and amend things in his own way. Really? I have, but since he was too tired to bother calling it out and defending himself, Neji turned to the blonde and settled on the simple truth. The question was innocent enough. Though he could detect the slightest trace of bitterness, he deserved it, he knew, but it still annoyed him. No, it's because if I ask, she will not say no. There was no more explanation. Naruto appeared a little perplexed and dropped it when he didn't appear to come to any conclusion. Neji returned to placing the glass on his forehead and returned his focus to the diagrams, leaving the blonde silent and thoughtful. Do you feel comfortable with this? The silence was abruptly broken by Naruto. It'll go away. He gave himself a hazy gesture and said, no, are you all right with this? After giving Naruto a contemplative glance, Neji turned to the glass in his hands and said, it's just a mission assignment. I'm serious. Naruto's expression hardened, and oddly, the blonde seemed to balance between anger and fear. It's fine, look, if you don't want, if this. It's fine, Neji reiterated, as firmly as he did when speaking to Naruto. We're two shinobi on an assignment, as the glass smashed against the wood more loudly than was necessary, and we'll see it through to the end. Naruto complimented them with an uneven smile as blue eyes flashed with something like astonishment and then gratitude. One nation away, Uchiha Sasuke collapsed to his knees in front of a missionary nin who lay in a shivering heap. Whimpering pitifully, his eyes wide and unfocused, the whites around his dilated pupils bloodshot. His body trembled, too, for a totally different reason, and the seal on his shoulder tingled as he braced himself, one hand in the dirt, the other clutching at his stinging eyes. Too tired to sense and identify Kakashi by his chakra signature, Sasuke let his hand drop from his eyes to check his sensei's filthy sandals, half expecting to see blood on his hand as he heard footsteps approaching, cautious but lazy, and felt them stop beside him. You alright? Kakashi. The lost expression in Sasuke's dark eyes was concealed by his matted bangs. Tell me about my Mangekyo. Fortunately, Sakura was unconscious. Although he was grateful that he could talk freely with Sasuke in this circumstance, Kakashi felt a little bad about his relief. He carried Sakura home to Konoha in a piggyback position, adjusting her weight on his back so as not to disturb the angry welt on her forehead. He pondered how to respond to the boy who was walking beside him and drew lead. "Sue, you know about your Mangekyo Sharingan?" "Apparently, so do you," Sasuke said again. His voice unrestrained in its accusation. He tugged uneasily at his supply pack's straps. "Well," continues Kakashi's word search, Sasuke interrupted, saying, "It's impossible. I can't, I didn't do it, it shouldn't be possible." Kakashi looked at his pupil. "What didn't you do?" Kakashi inquired calmly, and with genuine interest. Sasuke missed the subtlety. He paused and fixed the Junin's eyes with his own. "Don't you know, Sharingan Master?" he yelled. His eyes were blazing with charcoal. "Don't you know everything?" Surprised, Kakashi blinked, and a flash of, "Did it hurt?" glittered in his own eye. Then it narrowed into a grin. "You think too highly of me, Sasuke. I didn't know of the Mangekyo Sharingan until I confronted your brother, but I got to know it pretty intimately then." The sudden twinge of guilt threw Sasuke off balance. Yes, Kakashi was also a victim at the time. Sasuke chose to remain silent and move on since he was too proud to offer an explicit apology. Kakashi proceeded cautiously. "I've been trying to develop my own since, though, with some progress." Sasuke almost whipped himself. "What? But I haven't been able to replicate your brother's." Kakashi paused, looking sidelong at his disbelieving pupil. "Maybe it's something I haven't done?" Sasuke's lips formed a thin line, and he fell silent once more as his student fought between trusting his sensei and keeping a clan secret. The Junin watched. Sasuke finally said, "You have to kill your closest friend," with some tension. "There's no other way to evolve the Sharingan past 3 Tomo otherwise." Lost for words, Kakashi uttered a halting, "Oh." They traveled on in heavy silence. Kakashi then came to a halt with a weight entirely unrelated to the kunoichi on his back. His entire body appears to sag under heavy lids. His haunted eyes sparkled. He said, "Oh," much more softly, as though he had just realized something. Sasuke's cheeks burned, and he avoided looking at his sensei. As the sun moved across the sky, they continued on. "Hey, Kakashi?" Kakashi put his thoughts aside and faced his pupil. "Is there ever any water in your Sharingan?" With a somewhat bittersweet smile, the Junin looked down at the dirt road. "Yeah, it stings like hell sometimes." Sasuke felt somewhat better after saying, "HN." As he brought up Itachi, Kakashi observed Sasuke closely and explained, "It takes a lot out of a person to use the Mangekyo. It is for me, and it was true for your brother too. But as for how you and I obtained it, I think that the requirement to develop the Mangekyo Sharingan is not absolute. For a true Mangekyo certainly, but not its variants," Kakashi added quickly, before Sasuke could object. "But just judging from you and me, there seems to be some psychological element to building the Mangekyo," he said. "Similar to thinking you've murdered a friend or shame or intent." Sasuke allowed the words to linger in his thoughts, and only much later would he realize how much Kakashi had shared about his own past at that precise moment. "And it seems," Kakashi went on, "that if the absolute requirement is not met to evolve the Sharingan into the true Mangekyo form, then the powers of each variant are specific to the situation in which they are triggered. It will take more effort to get it to grasp it because the requirements weren't literally met, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that either yours or mine are malfunctioning. Don't worry, we'll work on comprehending and managing yours." Sasuke's jaw ached from clenching his teeth. Kakashi sighed inwardly, turning his gaze from his pupil to the blue sky. "It seems that you and I have a ways to go," the Hokage had said. "Whatever technique Naruto is under, the pain is real." Sasuke had thought as much, but having it confirmed pulled the unsettling ether into something rock solid that caught in his throat and settled painfully in his chest. He had unknowingly attacked Naruto with the Mangekyo Sharingan, and he didn't even know what he'd put his teammate through. Images, memories, sensations. To divert his thoughts, Sasuke shook his head. Focus on the mission report. He was now on his way to the Hokage's office, where he was responsible for delivering the mission report while Kakashi took Sakura to the hospital. When he arrived at the double doors, which were slightly open, he knocked to let himself in. When they made eye contact, the Hokage, who appeared to be just getting settled behind her desk, wrinkled her nose slightly in disapproval of the boy's impolite behavior but nodded in recognition. "Sasuke-kun." He came back and said, "Hokage-sama, reporting for Team 7. As she worked on her papers, Tsunade said, "I'll be with you in a moment." After a moment of silence, Sasuke heard a faint breath behind him and turned to see Hyuga Neji sitting with his back against the wall, his head cocked and his forearm across his eyes, unsure of how to respond. Sasuke looked at the older genin, who had been one of the few he wanted to test himself against during the Chunin exam, but then he heard about the boy's near-death experience during his retrieval. As fascinating as the Hyuga appears, Sasuke has no desire to face him now. Someone rushed through the door just as Sasuke was debating whether to be worried or unconcerned. As he said, "I brought the toe," Naruto halted suddenly, a wet cloth slipping out of his grasp. To say it was awkward would be an understatement. "Hey," Naruto said. Breaking the quiet, Sasuke tried to nod respectfully, not believing his voice, but his voice left his lips before it could reach his brain. Hey. Sasuke turned back to the Hokage, waiting to be addressed, while Naruto stood uncertainly for a moment before turning to the boy against the wall. Naruto cautiously brushed Neji's forearm to signal him to lift it off his face. Neji jerked away without releasing his eyes from the warm pressure. "I'm fine," Neji returned, annoyed. "Hey." Naruto knelt down next to the Hyuga, trying hard to focus on his injured comrade. "Let's see him." "Just let me see them, please. I didn't just go all the way down the hall as your errand boy for nothing." Naruto grabbed Neji's arm and lifted it just enough, but this time the Hyuga didn't pull away. Neji stifled a wince as he slowly opened the other eyelid and watched the blood drain out of the blonde's face. One eyelid cracked open slightly, and the sudden rush of cool air and light stung his already aching eye. Neji wrinkled his nose and turned his head away as Naruto stammered, "They're red. I mean, not Sharingan red, but pink. They're completely bloodshot." "Neji?" Naruto's brow furrowed in a way that resembled rage, and he thrust the wet cloth into Neji's hand, who accepted it with equal vigor. "Why are you exerting yourself so much, Neji? It will be my fault if you kill your eyes and are expelled from the Hyuga." With something between a scoff and a laugh, Neji said, "Kh." He covered his eyes with the cool cloth and put his arm back on them for the reassuring pressure. "I'm not kidding. I don't want you to go blind and then live cursing fate or anything else because of me," Naruto said with a frown. "I won't be blind," Neji said gravely in response, "not anymore." As he struggled to understand Neji's words, Naruto's brow stayed pinched, but when he noticed that Neji's lips were slightly raised, something clicked, and Naruto smiled back, playfully punching the other in the arm and saying, "Jerk." From the corner of his eye, Sasuke observed the exchange. The boys' voices were too low for him to hear, but their obvious companionship evoked in him a strange, unsettling sensation that he was unable to pinpoint. When did they start to get close? "Ready for your report, Sasuke-kun." With his feet spread and his hands clasped behind his back, Sasuke returned his focus to the Hokage and presented the report with professionalism and accuracy. "Great work, Sasuke-kun. I hope Sakura's wounds aren't too severe." Naruto straightened his back as Tsunade asked her apprentice. Sasuke knew his other teammate was listening intently, so he said, "Nothing serious. She was conscious upon our return. She recently went to the hospital for a checkup," he added. "Good, then you're dismissed." As the blonde watched, Sasuke walked out of the room without even glancing at Naruto. The boy said to the Sannin, "Naruto, how about you go see how Sakura is doing?" Naruto brightened, smiled, and started to head for the door, but stopped to glance back at Neji, who appeared to be trying to regulate his breathing. "Are you certain you won't assist him?" "I'm fine." As Tsunade repeated, "He's fine. His body needs to develop resistance to the effects. You never know when a regular medic will be available or even able to treat this." Naruto didn't seem convinced. "He's fine," Tsunade said resolutely. "Do I appear to be someone who would tell you lies?" "I don't know," Naruto said. "You are an old hag pretending to be." "Go." Tsunade's forehead ached with rage as she leaned menacingly over her desk. Unsettling. "All right. I'm leaving." The blonde then ran out. "On your feet, Neji." Tsunade paused to sit and rub the diadem across her forehead. As instructed, the genin stood in front of the Hokage's desk, steadied himself on the wall, and blinked at the light. Neji's cheeks began to warm slightly as Tsunade said, "Aside from straining yourself, that was quite an impressive demonstration earlier," with a wry smile. "Your effort and achievement are noted, but hard work and genius aside, there are still physical limitations to how quickly the Byakugan can adapt to novel Jujutsu." The medic nin cocked her head slightly and her eyes twinkled. "The catch," Neji thought angrily. "Neji-kun, tell me how long you've been working on seeing the soul before I gave you this assignment." Tsunade's curiosity was satiated by the Hyuga prodigy's hesitation, who pressed his lips together and said, "Can you have a fully written report of your findings by day after tomorrow?" "Yes," Neji said, nodding in an attempt to break the formality. Tsunade smiled and leaned back in her chair, tying her fingers together. "Then I expect it on my desk Wednesday. Get some rest, Neji-kun, and keep heat on them as much as you can." "Well done." As he walked away, Tsunade shook her head and Neji bowed. "What a child." A second later, Kakashi walked in. He said, "You didn't tell me," without introducing himself. and the Sannin raised an inquisitive eyebrow. That Sasuke killed Naruto. Tsunade's face darkened. Hitaki, there's no use applying salt to the wound, let's keep it to ourselves for the benefit of your team. Fair enough. Kakashi shot back, could you cooperate with him? Kakashi had a lot of ideas, all of which included the word, troublesome, but he felt foolish at the time to voice his annoyance because he had already made a promise. Yeah. Guy does not take his self-imposed rules lightly, and a few days later, after attending a Junin meeting that had begun on time, Kakashi was actually reasonably on time to meet with his genin. This was due to the fact that Guy broke down his door and carried him overhead, leaving a dust trail in their wake. However, from a distance, the three young genin were not so much ninja as children, an insecure kunyachi, a stoic, an idiot, and it evoked a bittersweet sense of nostalgia in Kakashi, who slowed almost to a halt so that they could remain children in his imagination for a brief moment. Sakura touched the bandage, looking a little ashamed, but then one of them surprised me and knocked me out with the hilt of his kunai, she concluded. You did a fantastic job, Sakura-chan, and I would have completely protected you if I had been there, unlike a pathetic person I know, Naruto said. Don't criticize Sasuke-kun. He was incredible, Sakura defensively retorted, and Naruto pouted while crossing his arms. Anyway, the kunoichi went on. What have you been up to? Better you? After tensing up a little, Naruto gave Sakura a cheeky smile. Top the secret mission. He emphasized each word with a wave of his fingers. Yeah, right. The genin turned to Kakashi's voice and said, yes, exactly, Naruto. Did you not have a top secret meeting with the Hokage this morning? Kakashi asked in jest, and his pupil's eyes widened. Oh no. I overlooked it. Then he took off, Naruto. There was a pause, and the boy turned to face his sensei expectantly. Hurry along, Naruto turned, confused, and did so. Sakura questioned incredulously, don't tell me he really is working on a mission, Kakashi-sensei. The Junin considered what he would say next. Yes, he's going to take some time to reflect. Sakura laughed at how cheesy that sounded, and Sasuke snorted for the same reason. Kakashi then looked directly at Sasuke, who scowled and became a little perplexed by a pressure in his chest. The kunoichi then noticed the heavy atmosphere. Wait, you don't really mean that, do you? Kakashi gave a shrug. Sakura, a little annoyed by her untrustworthy sensei, was about to say something like, wait, what about the exam for Chunin? Will we continue as a team? I mean, Sakura stumbled, if you nominate us, that is, Kakashi said, tilting his head. Kakashi lightly retorted, I don't think he'll be participating this time. But, Sakura gave Sasuke a tense look. Sakura, did you think I wouldn't take care of my students? The teams will be somewhat mixed up. Asuma and I have already spoken. After all, his pupil is already a Chunin. Sasuke and Sakura both saw visions of Ino and Sakura arguing and handling Sasuke at the same time in a moment of planet-aligning synchronicity. I hope we get Choji, they both thought. And Guy's team may be a man down. As Sasuke considered every possible configuration for the teams, Sakura became worried. But Lee-kun seems to be recovering fine, isn't he? Kakashi gave a hazy response, I'm sure he's fine, adding, it'll all work itself out. He vanished in a cloud of smoke before Sakura realized he had been planning to nominate them all along. Naruto stormed through the mahogany door, saying, Granny Tsunade, I'm here, oomph. He landed on the floor without grace after his face squished against something soft. Hey, watch it now, Jiraiya said, towering over him with a look of amusement on her face. Naruto turned slightly blue and grimaced when he realized he was on the verge of eating the lecher's rump. Blech. Naruto choked out in an overly dramatic manner, saying, Pervy Sennin, why are you here? Naruto finally noticed someone else in the room. Neji was looking at him placidly. Neji too? I believed we were finished. Oh no, you three are just starting, now that we've confirmed your condition, Tsunade said with a faint, sly smile. Brat, pack your bags, you're taking a brief vacation. Naruto scratched his head and turned to face the Hokage, but the blonde senpai's attention was fixed on the Hokage, and his face showed a hint of nervousness as he looked at the Hyuga, wondering if he hadn't been forced to join. What are we doing, then? When I come along, what do you think you'll be doing? Jiraiya posed a challenge. Practicing? Hopingly, Naruto asked. That made Jiraiya smile. Research. Sasuke stepped into the clearing where Naruto had had his breakdown, the sky hanging a deepening blue as the last of twilight gave way to a sickle moonlit night, the place feeling a little off-kilter, a stump marking the training post that had been destroyed during their confrontation, and he looked down as if he were avoiding someone's eyes, wondering vaguely how he got there. His eyes narrowed as he realized he was standing in front of a training post. Thwack thwack, thud, thump, thump as he hammered the post. Sasuke felt a chill from his sweat-dampened skin. He told himself, I'm just training. This had nothing to do with Naruto going off to find a cure for whatever the hell he had, or the gnawing sensation in his stomach, or the poison in his eyes, a dark smudge on the wood where his burning knuckles had been, or the fact that he had been abandoned once more, or even the feelings he didn't want to put into words because doing so would only make them seem more real. Find your center, bend your knees, and tighten your abs. He reprimanded the post. Tsunade's brows pinched in concentration as she wriggled her head and wrists at strange angles, trying in vain to outsmart the opaque brown shadow cast by the tungsten desk lamp to see what she was writing underneath it. Needless to say, paperwork at night put Tsunade in a snippy mood. The door opened. What? She yelled angrily without raising her gaze. The harsh greeting bounced off his thick skin, tempered by years of familiarity, and Jiraiya poked his head in sideways from behind the door, his wild white mane falling to the floor. Ah, princess, be careful, your age will be evident on that anxious forehead. A paperweight flew past Jiraiya's head, and he ducked. She stared down at her hair and said, I'm really not in the mood, Jiraiya, adding, there's so many of these damn documents to prep for international travel. Geez, didn't I dismiss him? She put down her brush and sat back impatiently, feeling Jiraiya enter the office fully, his head cocked just so, looking at her silently. You have business with me? You need a break, Jiraiya said, dismissing the inquiry. Sake, my treat. An eggplant miso and salted soury snack stand in Konoha kept late hours, serving customers who were meeting friends or hungry after most restaurants closed tonight. A fried gyoza promotion kept the place bustling with activity, and unless you looked closely, you would barely notice the motionless shadow of a figure sitting at the far end of the counter. Occasionally, Hitaki Kakashi found solitude in public. He twirled a piece of dango at the end of a stick distractedly over his empty miso bowl, his brush of gray hair drooping slightly, and felt every moment of his 27 years. It couldn't have been an accident that he was assigned Naruto and Sasuke, though he was prepared to think it was some kind of cosmic joke, and the expectations of ghosts had weighed on his thin shoulders ever since. He had made a lot of mistakes and almost failed miserably when Sasuke defected to the Sound, and now he bore the responsibility of unraveling the mysteries of the Sharingan. A gift not by blood, but by obligation, and being sufficiently knowledgeable to entice Sasuke to stay, or at the very least teach him enough to control it and hope to instill some values along the way. Under his mask, Kakashi scowled. He informed Sakura and Sasuke about Naruto's trip that afternoon, but he had kept Naruto's condition vague enough, and Sasuke didn't seem very happy about it. He wasn't sure why, though he had some theories, but he'll need to be on guard anyhow. And Naruto. He'd been a total wildcard since day one. Kakashi's thoughts drifted back to a memory of the Kyuubi that had been burned into him more than 10 years ago. He had never disregarded its power, but somehow, because of Naruto's unwavering optimism and resolve, he allowed faith to creep in, clouding his vision and causing him to miss the early symptoms. Once more, what could I have done? What could I have done differently? In his mind's eye, he saw his sensei through a haze, those sad eyes disappointed, despite a cheerful smile that told him otherwise, and the weight tightened against his chest. Practically speaking, he knew he couldn't do everything, far from it, but it hurt to know that the only thing he could do was to let his student go. Someone was behind him, and his trained senses suddenly jolted him out of his reverie. He acknowledged the presence and gave himself a little reprimand, but Kakashi remained vigilant. It's off hours, Tenzo. The mask might be taken away from you. Kakashi caught a glimpse of a young man taking the seat next to him and an Anbu mask resting on the counter. Tenzo smiled slightly amusedly and said, I could say the same for you, senpai. The dango kept spinning, and I wish you wouldn't use my real name in public. As the waiter refilled his tea and placed an additional cup down, Kakashi disregarded the request and said nothing. Is it really okay that you're not going with them? At last, he inquired. Tenzo took a moment to collect himself before saying, I'm needed with my squad. His face softened when Kakashi didn't resist, adding, from what I can tell, Naruto is in good hands with Jiraiya-sama and the Hyuga. Even though they haven't yet dealt with the Kyuubi directly, who knows? Perhaps it won't be an issue at all. After putting the dango stick down on his plate, Kakashi laughed wearily and said, your optimism is unbecoming of an ANBU. Maybe, but you're not Anbu anymore. Tenzo unconsciously fidgeted with his teacup and thought, maybe, but you're not Anbu anymore. I wouldn't worry about your students, senpai, since you were their teacher. Perhaps this is why Kakashi senpai keeps his mask on at that moment. Kakashi turned to face his Kahai. and the young Anbu hoped his face showed sincerity instead of nervousness, and wished for all the world he still had his mask on. Kakashi then grinned. He gave Tenzo a firm shoulder clap and said, "You know, I always thought you had a lot of potential. Don't let your team down, I'll be expecting good things from you," he said, leaving the young man sitting with his mouth slightly open. Tenzo would confess to himself that he had, quite honestly, idolized Kakashi during their time together at Anbu. Kakashi was all about professionalism and teamwork, and he never gave out personal praise. Did the copy Nin, a legend of this generation, believe in him? Tenzu's chest grew with a renewed determination to become a successful shinobi. To one day be deserving of such faith. He was sitting at the counter, preoccupied with thoughts of the future, when a slip of paper fell into his line of sight. When he turned around, he could only see the shadow of Kakashi's vanishing back. Senpai. The bill. Tsunade ate her food distractedly as two other legends sat at a diner a few blocks away with a spread reminiscent of their reunion not so many months ago. She was bothered by the urgent pressure to talk to Jiraiya, and he was amazed at how much she'd taken on responsibility since the old girl had so adamantly refused it. Although it hadn't exactly been easy sailing, he was more confident than ever that he'd passed the offer to the right person. Not that selfish motivations didn't play a part, but he was really better suited for other things. However, this time, with an extra child to watch over, and a Hyuga of all people, it could prove to be more difficult than usual. "So you've used the Hyuga to clear it?" Jiraiya asked. His cheeks flushed a little as he swilled his sake bottle agitatedly. Tsunade finished her cup and said, "Yes, I told Hiyashi about the trip, but I didn't provide any specifics so he could legally avoid answering any questions from the others." Jiraiya gave a disapproving and appraising grunt, saying, "Damn, family's all backwards. You know they're not the only ones who feel that way, but they are the only ones who can help." Tsunade politely retorted. Jiraiya snorted incredulously, and Tsunade furrowed her brows. "Don't give the boy a hard time," she cautioned, and the Toad Sanin turned his face away and pouted like a whiny child. Tsunade examined the empty cup in her hands while they were silent. "Thanks for doing this." "Well?" Jiraiya waited while turning his gaze to Tsunade. "There is very little documentation for anything pertaining to souls, but I wish there was more in the archives. Without more information, I can't do much without running a very high risk of failing, even with Neji-kun's assistance." As he turned to face his old friend, Jiraiya's expression softened. "There's no denying it, is there? Messing with human souls is forbidden in the Leaf. Naturally they wouldn't keep study material lying around for some idiot wanting to," he said, smiling to deflect her frown. "Besides, I'm getting restless," he continued. "Any excuse to travel is always appreciated." Tsunade refilled her cup as his fake smile faded into a thick, awkward silence between them. She took a sip of her sake and said, "Tampering with the soul is best left to the gods," leaving the unspoken topic hanging between them. Jiraiya, on the other hand, had just enough to loosen his tongue, and he laughed without humor. "If we could find what we needed at Orochimaru's, wouldn't that be hilarious?" Tsunade spared him the reprimand, but she gave him a glare as though there couldn't be anything less amusing. "He needs 3 years?" After 2 3/4, Jiraiya remained silent and said, "Yup. And the Akatsuki needs 3, more or less." Tsunade hummed reflectively. "That's convenient, After shrugging, Jiraiya said, "I'm just telling it like it is." "Well, that'll give us more time," Tsunade said. Although she felt her heart race with urgency, she was staring at Jiraiya when she noticed Dan and Nawaki grinning and laughing quietly in a fog that was too far away for her voice to reach. "You know," she began somewhat clumsily, "it might come down to creating a jutsu involving." She didn't pull away when she felt a warm, reassuring hand wrap around her fingers across the table. "I know," Jiraiya concluded, preventing her from speaking, and he respectfully withdrew after squeezing her hand. Tsunade, on the other hand, couldn't simply let the subject fall. After struggling to find the right words to describe her fears, Tsunade finally said, "Just make sure I don't have to classify it as a forbidden jutsu. I know if anyone had to, or even could, it would be you, but..." Without responding, Jiraiya poured more sake for them both. As Tsunade glared at him, "And if you do, bring the kids back first." Tsunade hoped and feared that the implicit "make sure you come home" was clear, but then there was a beat as Jiraiya looked at her with a confused expression that was simultaneously amused, surprised, and thoughtful. She was frustrated that her cheeks warmed a little despite herself, and she braced herself for the theatrical grin and tease for giving in to such sentimentality. But Jiraiya surprised her with a quiet, lopsided smile. "Of course." Tsunade let her shoulders, which she was unaware were tense, loosen up a bit. "A prince can't let his princess worry, even if he has been dumped." "Idiot." As they raised their cups and toasted to things unsaid, Tsunade smiled back at him, finding it surprisingly easy to resist the urge to knock him upside down despite the reprimand. Naruto moaned, "I shouldn't have had that fourth bowl of ramen." He lay curled up on the bed, feeling a little queasy, but he told himself that it was Iruka-sensei's treat, so he pushed himself to maintain appearances because he had worked too hard to lose what he had accomplished. It had always been a difficult, angry battle to get people to recognize him, but the fear of losing what he had gained made him tremble inside, like ice choking his heart. Having started with less than nothing, Naruto never took what he had gained for granted, unlike some people, and he vowed to do everything in his power to keep deserving it. Particularly for Iruka-sensei, who was the first to express faith in him. Naruto loved that faith and never wanted to let him down, even if it was just by eating the recommended quantity of food. No, it's more than that. Naruto believed Iruka-sensei had that anxious expression when I stopped at the third bowl more than not wanting to let him down. Naruto didn't want to worry Iruka the way he thought he wouldn't want to worry a father or a brother. It had been another mentally taxing day of acting normal, and Naruto pulled a face and physically shook the surfacing thoughts away to instead focus on the comforting sensation of his limbs sagging into his mattress. It was like Naruto searched his mind for a metaphor, like screwing a faucet shut tight. Tsunade figured that before his hospitalization, he was constantly suppressing the Kyuubi subconsciously, and that was what sapped his energy. It was true that it took much less effort to be cheerful, excited, irritable, something that was him, but it was still an awfully strange and conflicting sensation knowing what one should be. But isn't it hard work being yourself? He thought humorlessly. It seemed ironic that he had to entrust his identity and vulnerabilities to the very person who attempted to kill her. And he wondered vaguely if all families were as strange as the Hyuga. He reflected on the time he had confided to Hinata, and he was thankful that she was different, and he told her so, and didn't seem like the kind of person who would judge him. He really is okay, Naruto thought, though he was surprised that he could be a little more real around Neji and didn't need to pretend quite so much. It was a nice feeling among all the other pressures weighing him down. The blonde's drowsy mind wandered aimlessly through the past week of working with Neji and rested on the moment he had confronted him about helping. We must move quickly to gather more information so that Granny can come up with a remedy, but his gaze remained fixed on the traitor's half-packed bag on the floor. Regardless, he was less frustrated and more eager to find a solution now that he understood why he couldn't use chakra as effectively as before. Sasuke, what a dumb bastard! The blonde spluttered out loud, and with a rush of adrenaline, he swung himself into a sitting position. Every time Naruto tried to figure out why he felt anxious and uneasy about the trip, he thought about the genjutsu. Was it really an accident? Tsunade said it was, that the Sharingan was new and unstable, but really, was it? In his mind, Naruto wanted to give Sasuke the benefit of the doubt, but something alien squirmed and fluttered unpleasantly inside. The brief meeting that morning was the first time he'd seen him since the incident, and they definitely didn't say anything important to one another. Naruto huffed and scrunched his nose up in annoyance. What was he expecting? An apology? Some sign of remorse? As if, he thought bitterly. It was as if the jerk was getting rewarded, and Naruto didn't notice his fists clenching when Tsunade said Sasuke would be staying to train his new Sharingan. Why does he get to get stronger and train with Kakashi-sensei while I have to play catch-up? No, it was more than that. Sasuke had genuinely wanted to kill him, and he did. Naruto was thankful that the Kyuubi valued self-preservation, but it was also Kyuubi's clawing at his weak defenses that left him feeling sick and incompetent all the time, and it was all because his teammate fucking killed him. Does he even know? Naruto wasn't sure he felt. What was the word? Resentful. The feeling didn't sit well with him. It was like poison, and he wasn't sure if it was his feelings or not. Even if that bastard knew, I'm willing to wager he wouldn't give a damn. On nights like this, the old him would occasionally sit atop the monument, watching over the village like the great cages immortalized on the mountain. Over the village he's sworn to protect. A slight breeze brushed against his skin as he got up testily to close the balcony door, but he stopped when he arrived because the sickle moon was smiling gently down on the village, dotted with evening lights. The fourth, timeless and unwavering, the dark profile strangely familiar as if he'd seen it in a dream, caught his attention as he looked up at the monument from his balcony. Tonight Naruto felt a cleansing fire surge within his heart and blinked foolishly at his self-consciousness as the stony eyes looked down upon him, feeling a little silly and a little ashamed that he'd allowed self-pity and dark thoughts to overshadow what was important. I made a self-promise to stop crying and to stop being a victim. Damn it, I'm Naruto Uzumaki. With defiant eyes, he extended his hand and clenched the effigy in a fist that was reinforced by his own vow. Observe me. It was gloomy. It smelled of wood and earth, and his flesh, swallowed invisible by tar thick black, felt cool and clammy. Sasuke blinked once, twice, and was unable to move. He couldn't be certain if his eyes were even open, and his blindness was unnerving in the silence. All of a sudden, he was having trouble breathing. Where am I? Sasuke thought, on the edge of panic, as his surroundings came into focus and he realized he had fallen asleep in the clearing the night before. Blood rushed under his skin. This is something the idiot would do, he thought. Suddenly annoyed, his eyes snapped open to a painful burst of light as he woke with a start, his back cold and damp, his heart pounding violently in his chest. Sasuke grunted and swung himself into a sitting position, shaking the unsettling sensation of sleep paralysis from his mind. His eyes focused on his Hite-8, which had somehow fallen off in his sleep, and his numb mind viewed the band like some strange animal, strangely foreign when seen out of its usual place. He gingerly picked it up and ran his thumb along the metal plate, feeling the rough, etched leaf insignia and the small nicks and scratches. The Konoha symbol, loyalty, camaraderie, and the will of fire were the virtues that Iruka had taught them were embodied in the leaf, but to Sasuke, they were just sugar-infused words that had no substance. And Sasuke will not give them meaning. And left a bad taste in his mouth. It never meant much to him, not in the way the symbol on his back had branded him and set his path, nor in the way Naruto prized it beyond comprehension. That symbol had been on the verge of being cut through. The headband felt strangely heavy in his hands, possibly because the cloth was soaked in morning dew, so he tightened his hold on it and started running. Compress, emergency rations, green tea, bandages, standard weapons, and changing clothes. Yes, it was his cousin hovering just outside his open doorway. Neji stopped taking inventory and froze. To whom am I due this distinction? Hinata blushed and made a startled little noise at being found, stuttering for words as Neji stood unhelpfully silent. Finally, in a moment of embarrassment, Hinata bowed low to avoid seeing her cousin's reaction, squeezed her eyes shut for good measure, and thrust out a jar of healing balm with outstretched arms. When Hinata finally felt the weight removed from her fingers, the dreaded silence that followed felt unabatedly long, and the voices of her insecurities lingered impatiently at the edge of her consciousness. She blinked and straightened up just in time to see the last of Neji's quizzical expression change into a formal one. Thank you, Hinata-sama. She drew her arms close to her body again. She began, feeling more courageous. Are you and Naruto going to be gone for a long time? The color of her cheeks turned Sakura pink. Neji tucked the bomb tightly in his pack and said, it's hard to say. Oh, Neji watched her characteristically cast down her eyes and, his expression warming almost imperceptibly, let the formality loosen up as she swayed slightly in place, tapping her index fingers together. You should go say goodbye. As she hurried down the hall, Hinata thought, no, I'll wish him good fortune. She glanced in his direction, gave him a shy smile, and nodded slightly before turning to go. Her light steps became a trot, then a run. Hunch. As Naruto frantically pulled at the burden on his shoulders, his muscles strained against a losing battle with gravity. The grinding of ivory against ivory had left his jaws sore. Naruto. Whoa, startled, he screamed and fell face first into the ground. Almost instantly, Naruto appeared and shook his fist. What the devil was that for, Sakura-chan? I should ask you the same thing, she said sourly as she walked up to him on the street. What the hell is in that bag? Ironically, Naruto didn't think he packed enough to fill a bag larger than himself, so he turned to stare at his abandoned orange backpack and rubbed the back of his head. He became acutely aware that he was speaking to Sakura. Oh, nothing, it isn't anything, I'm just, taking out the laundry, he said too loudly, nervously waving his hands as perspiration began to form around his temples. Yes, that's it, I decided it was time to get the dirty clothes washed because they were just piling up, haha. It wasn't until he opened his eyes to discover Sakura gone that he realized he had closed them while forcing a laugh. Sakura-chan. Zarip. When Naruto turned around, he saw Sakura removing fistfuls of scrolls and weapons from his bag and discarding them behind her. Oh no. What are you doing? Did I mention laundry? He slapped his forehead in his head and thought, dummy, that would have been more believable if you said that first. I meant, I was going out to the woods to train. I know you're going away. Sakura pulled out a quilt and half his supply of cup ramen, and her serious voice surprised him more than her declaration. Oh no. Half expecting a tirade about how bad he was at lying, or how stupid he must be if he thought he could slip out and avoid confronting her about leaving, Naruto stammered. A little defeated, instead of dragging himself to fuss over his ramen, he looked away and braced himself. I apologize, I was unaware. She squatted quietly next to his bag, and Naruto looked up, puzzled and a little afraid. Her eyes and voice were soft. How about? Knowing the answer, he asked, his voice almost breaking. That you're not feeling well. Naruto forced a smile. Hey, who are you? It's okay, she said, shaking her head. Kakashi-sensei told us you were a little under the weather and needed to go get better. Naruto was stunned. Unless Sakura was being particularly considerate of his feelings, Kakashi must have omitted any information about his predicament. Kakashi-sensei, he said more to himself than his teammate, and he kept his word, realizing that his chest tightened a little. I owe him one. Yeah, he finally told us after Sasuke-kun badgered him about why you were leaving, Sakura said, turning to face him and grinning slightly. Naruto turned his head away with a frown, embarrassed to see that he was blushing. Sasuke? Yes, he certainly did. No, he did, Sakura said, somewhat taken aback, and he's worried both of us are. Yes. You know that bastard doesn't care about anyone but himself, Naruto said, turning to Sakura and firmly placing his hands in his pockets. Naruto reprimanded Sakura, who decided there was no way to persuade the unyielding boy and instead pressed the bag against his chest, causing Naruto to oomph as air rushed out of his lungs and catch the bag before it hit the ground. Isn't that preferable? Admiring her handiwork, Sakura asked smugly, just the necessities, you can improvise for the rest, and Jiraiya-san will take care of you, I'm sure. He stumbled, thanks, Sakura-chan, and shoulder-ered the bag. A moment of awkward standing ensued at last. Naruto said, well, I better get going, and started to walk away. Hey, Sakura raised her pinky as Naruto turned. We'll both be stronger when you get back. When Naruto noticed the fire in her eyes, his breath caught in his chest, and he was abruptly reminded of the reasons he liked her so much. His own blue eyes mirrored that resolute flame as he hooked his pinky around hers. Yeah. Assure me. After 10 minutes and a few mental circuits, Naruto was standing in front of Sasuke's door. He exhaled and extended his hand. Knock, knock, knock. Then he waits, nervous energy making his body twitch unconsciously. Knock, knock, knock. He then waits. Knock, 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 knock. Now that he had met Sakura, Naruto wanted to see that dummy before he left, but he had no idea what he was doing or what he wanted to say, so he kicked at the door in frustration. He wasn't there, of course, a bastard. Tsunade discovered Uchiha entangled with her Chunin guards for the second time in as many weeks. Release him? Sasuke bowed after he jerked out of the Chunin's grasp and said, permission to join Jiraiya-san and Naruto's mission, Hokage-sama. Tsunade was taken aback by the request, but she recovered fast and forced her serious face together while resisting the upward curl of her lip. Permission denied. But, according to the council's stipulations, she said loudly, you are only allowed to leave Konoha's boundaries on authorized missions that are properly supervised or, shinobi, have you forgotten? This is not one of those missions, she said, her hard eyes staring into his defiant ones. The boy was trapped, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes darting as though after a heated internal argument, and Tsunade watched with some amusement as Sasuke struggled at last. Isn't that my fault? He didn't meet her eyes, and she didn't respond, so he was left to fill the void on his own. Sasuke's voice wavered as he said, it's my fault that dumbass is sick, so, however, it appeared that pride prevented him from expressing any self-apology. Isn't it expected of me to help fix things? Besides, he added, Jiraiya-san is my sensei, he hedged, his voice gradually growing more assured, my training won't be disrupted. Hitaki Kakashi is your assigned Junin sensei, Sasuke-kun, she corrected, and your mission is to concentrate on your training with him, and to turn yourself into at least a half-decent representative of the Leaf, Tsunade thought. Despite seeing beneath the surface, have I been understood? Yes, the boy said in a self-restrained voice, his lips tightening as if to contain a retort, and Tsunade suspected that Sasuke recognized the value of his tutelage under the copy nin. Tsunade noticed that he had dark circles under his eyes, and she found herself thinking about Naruto. She decided that her papers were a mess and set about cleaning her desk. She said casually, if you leave now, you'll still catch them at the gate, and she felt, more than saw, Sasuke give a hesitant nod before taking off, possibly even hinting at a bow. Finally Tsunade let herself smile, alone in her office. Neji had left the Hyuga compound without incident not too long before. Somehow, he found himself making his way to the usual spot out on the field, and as much as he hated to admit it, there were some family members who deserved his time. He hadn't bothered to say goodbye or to inform anyone there of his departure. Those who needed to know were told days ago, and he didn't feel the need to suffer needlessly through forced courtesies. Do not be alarmed, Neji-kun. With the full virility of your youthful power, I am confident that you will triumphantly return from your super-secret Hokage commissioned mission. Neji refused to rub the tick above his brow and took solace in the fact that he wouldn't have to put up with Jiraiya's antics. Lee made the announcement with great enthusiasm and correspondingly exaggerated gestures. Tenten gave him a sheepish shrug when he met her eyes. "You're correct. But it's unfortunate that you'll probably miss the Chunin exams," Gai-sensei yelled. Deflecting a shoulder slap intended for Neji to Lee to catch up to your teammates, "You'll need to put in extra effort." Neji was about to respond in the affirmative, but was sidetracked by Lee's stunned expression, which was more solemn than usual. His teammates, who were equally perplexed, turned and waited for an explanation. Lee was staring with wide eyes. I will become a Chunin. Line, I'll turn into Chunin before Neji. Sinker. This is my opportunity. Genius will be surpassed by hard work, it's a promise. Snot jiggled beneath Guy's nose and his lips trembled. Oh, my dear student. You have such a youthful attitude. Tenten got up calmly from her position on the log as the two beasts embraced and sobbed. And we just got back together as a team too, she said, a little wistfully, looking at the crazy pair that was still yelling capitalized words and making wild gestures. It'll be tough without you. According to Neji's diplomatic response, I'm sure Sensei can arrange for another genin to be the third team member. Lee, who had the ability to miraculously eavesdrop over his own noise, interrupted the Kunoichi just as he was about to reply. Oh, let's get Sakura-chan on board. We would love having her on our team. Get serious, Tenten reprimanded, placing her hands on her hips. You'll just get distracted. No, I won't. My level of dedication and focus will increase tenfold, if not more. A conditioned cold smirk turned up Neji's lip as he sneered. Give it up. There is no higher level of dedication for you. There was a beat of silence, and Lee's unnaturally wide eyes blinked at him, but it wasn't until they began to sparkle wetly that Neji realized he had given a backhanded compliment, and he was certainly unprepared when the boy tackled him over Lee's tearful affirmations of brotherhood. Neji could just make out his sensei's vivacious baritone and Tenten's pointless cries for order. His eyes still stung from the abuse, and his head hurt now. His stomach churned whenever he thought about his mission seriously, but he thought, tangled up in limbs and chaos, I'll gladly take on the 9 tails if it means a respite from my team. However, it was reassuring to know that they would be present to greet him upon his return. As soon as he left Tsunade's office, Sasuke started running, trying to tell himself that he was just hot because Jiraiya was leaving him. After all, he had agreed to return for training with the Sannin, and he still wasn't ready, not even close. He needed more training, more power, more hate. Surprisingly, though, he had no anchor for his life's ambition at the moment. All he felt was a sense of urgency that was pulling at his chest and igniting his feet. Something at the valley of the end that he couldn't leave behind, and the instant he hesitated, he took it and broke it in one fell swoop, and he didn't really want to think about it, but it had to do with Naruto, and he knew that he would not be at peace with things as they were. As he soared to the rooftops, the earth vanished beneath his feet. He looked up from his feet and saw the Sannin and Neji already waiting by the gate. Jiraiya pushed himself upright from the wall and waved him over. The sun hung cheerfully in the blue late morning sky as if mocking Naruto's troubled mind as he scraped his sandals slowly along the dirt road. Once past the wall, there was no turning back until they've met their objective, until they find a cure, until I'm stronger. Hesitantly, Naruto glances behind him again, naively hoping. There was nobody on the street. He lowered his gaze in disappointment. Hey, Naruto turned and saw Sasuke standing just an arm's length away, his hands in his pockets, casual and confident as ever. To his surprise, Naruto felt himself become hostile as heat flared up in his coils. What? He spat. Sasuke stood silent, unaware of the focused, controlled rise and fall of his teammate's chest, the slight tremble of his overworked legs, and Naruto became impatient. A frown appeared on Naruto's face as if those words could have come from Sasuke's mouth. What exactly? Thank you for bringing me back. Thank you for caring. Naruto's internal monologue grew more bitter. I'm sorry I tried to kill you, and I didn't really mean to use the Sharingan on you. I'm sorry for literally stealing your soul. Naruto might have been disappointed in his accuracy if he had been a little better at reading beneath the underneath and had seen the flicker behind Sasuke's dark eyes, but he couldn't expect any of that from Sasuke already. Don't get yourself killed. Time stopped and the fire extinguished, leaving Naruto speechless. That was sufficient. Yes, indeed, you as well. Finally, Sasuke threw his fist at Naruto as they stood there, breathing together and feeling at ease for the first time in months. Naruto extended his arm and tapped it with his own. Naruto, did you know that when your fists meet, you can read each other's minds without using words? And that was enough for now. As long as they were both alive, There might be a future. It wasn't exactly a promise, but it wasn't a lie either. Jiraiya grinned and said, "Hey, Naruto, come on, let's go." "All right." With a small nod, Naruto trotted off to catch up to his departing group after calling to the Sannin and locking eyes with Sasuke. Once more Naruto didn't need to look back, but if he had, he would have seen Sasuke hovering, watching them vanish into the unknowable horizon, and the path was clear enough to move forward 1 foot at a time under the warm sun.